Sit still. I'll have you sitting in prison for life instead." Miller, the notorious white Chicago cop, snarled in the scorching midday heat of the park, pinning a black man in a suit to the ground like a predator catching prey. Suddenly the man, face pressed to the grass, smirked slightly, eyes locked onto Harris, the young, trembling cop standing beside them. Watch him chain himself. The FBI's about to applaud. Under the blazing sun, justice was about to slap handcuffs on the one who still thought his badge was a free pass for crime. Don't think it's peaceful. Violence is always lurking just around your street corner. Which state are you in? Could there be a Miller watching over your neighborhood at night? In the sweltering midday heat of Chicago, sunlight swept over a public park, rarely visited at this hour. The sound of car horns echoed from a nearby avenue, steady and mixed with the metallic clatter of a streetcar gliding along tracks hidden behind tall buildings. Heat radiated off the concrete pavement, blending with the faint smell of gasoline around a patrol car parked in the shade of a leafless maple tree near its base. Inside the vehicle, Miller, a hardened police officer with a square jaw and tired eyes that still held a sharp and rough cunning, wiped sweat from his temple and cursed quietly. He was irritated by the heat, the long shift, the radio's broken signals, and the rookie assigned to him, sitting beside him like a shadow. Harris, aged 25, was tall but thin, his police collar still free of sweat stains. He sat upright, staring out the window, occasionally glancing at Miller before pretending to focus on the deserted park. Miller smirked contemptuously at Harris and said, "You know why I hate rookies like you, Harris. When something happens, you just stand there with your mouth open. New guys are always scared of losing their job, getting sued, or being caught on video. But the real scum aren't afraid of you." Harris swallowed nervously and tried to keep his voice calm. "I'm still learning, boss." He did not add that Miller's crude insults against immigrants and black people were the very reasons he had to learn to stay silent. Miller snorted, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel, his eyes scanning through the sun-dappled trees. The car crawled along a brick-paved path. Between two low flower beds, Miller suddenly fixed his gaze. About 20 meters away, a black man in a neat gray suit and dark tie sat quietly on a bench, one earbud hanging loosely in his ear. He held a thick stack of documents on his lap, occasionally swiping his phone screen, then flipping papers, nodding lightly as if reviewing information. Miller narrowed his eyes until his pupils shrank into a thin line of suspicion. "See that, Harris? Look at that guy. Just the kind who pretends to be clean but is rotten inside. I bet he's full of dirty money or stolen goods. You believe me or not?" Harris watched but saw only a normal man, dressed neatly, sitting upright, paying no attention to anyone nearby. He cautiously whispered, "I think he's just on a lunch break, boss, or waiting for someone." Miller curled his lip, straightened in his seat, flicked ash to the edge of the grass. "You're too naive, Harris. Who sits in a park at noon, dressed like they're going to a wedding, reading papers? I've seen a dozen of those in a year, all trying to trick the police." Outside, the sun slanted. The wind barely stirred the dry maple branches. A pair of jogging students ran past, glanced back at the black man, then ignored him. He remained bent over the papers, his hand sliding across the phone screen as if unaware of the world lurking behind his back. But to Miller, every movement looked exactly like the surveillance footage of drug dealers just before they got caught. On the passenger seat, Harris suddenly felt his heartbeat pounding. He knew Miller would not sit still much longer. Inside the stuffy patrol car filled with the smell of sweat and stale cigarettes, Miller kept glancing in the rearview mirror, eyes shifting from the mirror to Harris, then fixed intently on the still figure far away. His right hand gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white. His breath grew heavy, chest rising and falling beneath a worn fabric vest. In Miller's mind flickered a shadowed memory that fueled an unexplainable anger. Years ago, he had let a well-dressed black man slip away, escaping conviction thanks to a lawyer and an unbeatable stack of papers. This time, he vowed, it would not happen again. Harris saw every tension-filled movement like a taut string. He licked his lips, voice hoarse over the crackling radio. "Boss, are you sure? We don't have a search warrant, no orders. What if—" Before he finished, Miller cut him off sharply. He turned, bloodshot eyes spitting words. Just sit tight. Don't act like you know the law better than me. If you want to survive in this unit, shut your mouth, Harris." An oppressive silence fell, broken only by the distant wail of sirens adding to the suffocating atmosphere. Miller pulled on thin gloves, stuffed them in his pocket, smoothed his name tag, then glanced at the radio screen flashing a support request. He switched it off without hesitation. Harris shrank back, eyes wild, looking out the window. A few elderly people sat under distant trees. Skinny students ran across a gravel path, none aware of what was about to unfold beneath this old patrol car's shadow. Miller snorted, tilted his head toward Harris, chewing out each word. "Consider it me doing a favor for the decent folks. That guy's not getting away, got it?" He twisted his wrist, thumb tracing the grip of his sidearm to ensure readiness. Harris turned involuntarily, catching that cold gaze. He understood any protest now was pointless. Only one thought remained. I can't stop him, and I'm about to become an accomplice. The driver's door swung open with a creak, then slammed heavily onto the hot pavement. Miller stepped out first, boots clicking sharply on the concrete. Each step crackled like electricity touching skin. Harris, startled, instinctively grasped the gun holster at his waist, then lowered his shoulders, opened the passenger door, and awkwardly followed. Sweat ran down his spine, soaking through his bulletproof vest lining. Just a few meters away, the black man remained unaware of the approaching storm. He lowered his head to examine a paper in his hand, the earbud dangling loosely. A hot breeze swept past, lifting the tail of his vest. As Miller's shadow stretched across the stone path, the man paused and slowly looked up. Their eyes met. Two opposing gazes, one blazing with suspicion, the other calm beyond understanding. In that moment, beneath Chicago's midday sun, amid the simmering concrete heat, a silent electric current sparked between them, ripping the air in a way no one could extinguish. Miller strode across the sun-dappled grass, his shadow falling over the bench and casting itself onto the shoulders of the man bent over the papers in his hand. The light on the man's shoulder vanished, replaced by the heat radiating from the polished leather shoes of a police officer standing too close. Harris lagged behind by a few steps, keeping his distance and scanning the park anxiously, as if afraid someone might accidentally witness the scene. But the quiet midday was almost silent, except for the occasional screech of the streetcar beyond the distant buildings, so still that the scraping sound of Miller's boots on the gravel was distinctly audible. Without any soft preamble, Miller's voice dropped sharply over the man like an unread verdict. "What are you doing sitting here? What's your name? What do you have in your pockets? Show me your papers, immediately." The man lifted his head, removing the earbud from his left ear slowly, and met Miller's harsh gaze steadily. There was no sign of fear or confusion, only a dry, polite demeanor measured just right. "So, when you I am on my lunch break, officer. Is there a problem?" The way he responded, the way his hands neatly held the documents, the clipped tone, as if accustomed to wearing a suit, sitting at wooden desks and listening to arrogant voices without bowing his head. All this only stoked Miller's boiling temper further. He snorted and flicked his fingers in command. "Stand up! I said, stand up!" The man glanced at his papers, then at Harris, who stood awkwardly behind Miller. Finally, he set the documents aside and stood upright with such rigidity that even Miller gritted his teeth. He spoke quietly, just loud enough for Miller to hear, but not Harris. "I have done nothing wrong, officer. If necessary, I can show you my ID card. But what is the reason for this inspection?" Harris cleared his throat and shifted slightly to his right to get a better view of the man's face. He noticed clearly the way the man stood still, yet his eyes scanned the surroundings, as if deliberately memorizing everything. From Miller flicking his fingers and nodding, to Harris tightening his grip on his holster without drawing his weapon, Miller glared, staring down the crisp vest on the man's shoulder, each word punctuated like a hammer strike. "You think cops like us are stupid, huh? Sitting here in the middle of the day doing what? Dealing, trading, or secretly handing over stuff to addicts?" The man did not blink. His lips pressed lightly together, his shoulders holding firm in a stance prepared to be attacked, but not one of fear. He shook his head calmly, his tone as even as a bureaucrat replying to a complaint letter. "I already answered, officer. If there is nothing else, I would like to continue sitting." The atmosphere among the three thickened into a burning tension. Harris felt his face flush as if scorched by a stove. He knew he lacked the strength to restrain Miller, and not the courage to dismiss the man, to say, "Sorry, please go." At that very moment, Miller took a deep breath, his lips twitching as if ready to roar something worse than all the questions before. Miller's voice hissed through clenched teeth like metal grinding, loud enough to drown out the wind and the heavy-breathing footsteps of two students who had circled back, panting and frozen before the imposing figure of a policeman blocking the path of a black man in a suit. A few meters away, an elderly woman paused, blinking and exhaling softly. A brown-skinned boy of about 15, with a backpack hanging on one shoulder, immediately pulled out his phone, secretly filming, the small screen trembling with the rhythm of his nervous hand. Miller lowered his voice so only Harris could hear. "See that? Look how arrogant he is. This kind has to be crushed before they tell the truth." Without waiting for Harris to reply, he pressed a hand onto the man's shoulder and jerked out each phrase sharply. "What are you hiding under your jacket? What's in that briefcase? Stay still. I'll check myself." Miller's hand grabbed the collar of the vest, pulling it forward until the fabric folded into an awkward crease on the man's shoulder. The man did not push the hand away or move a step, but spoke in a flat voice as plain as water. "I am ready to cooperate if you give me an official reason for arrest, officer." Harris shuddered at the phrase, "official reason for arrest." He stepped forward quickly, gently touching Miller's arm and whispering, "Boss, people are watching now. They are starting to record. Without a clear reason, this will cause trouble." Harris's chest tightened when he caught the glare of the elderly woman nearby and the angry eyes of the two students, who raised their phones towards them. Miller glanced sideways at Harris, his voice full of bitterness and challenge. "Let 'em record. I'll show them what real justice is. This kind doesn't get to roam the park freely in broad daylight." He turned back and leaned close to the man, the smell of stale cigarette breath wafting onto the pale vest collar. Around them, whispers broke out. A middle-aged man quietly protested somewhere. He didn't do anything. A young woman walking by shook her head in frustration. God, let the man rest during his lunch. The clicks of phone cameras followed one another, silently capturing Miller, Harris, and the black man standing amid a crowd mixed with indifference and curiosity. A few meters away, the boy live-streamed with his phone close to his face, whispering dramatically, "Chicago police are arresting a black man in a suit right in the park. Please share this. I'm not joking. Look, he's not resisting." Miller kept his face pressed close, his breath tense and sharp, his nose nearly touching the man's forehead. His hoarse but firm voice, like a verdict hammered before all the cameras, said, "All right, you want the law? I'll make you taste the law right now." The man only stared straight ahead with strange, deep eyes, neither fearful nor defiant, more like a steel door closed tight, ready to face the worst he knew was surely coming. Whispers, the clicking of phone cameras, and dozens of eyes staring like blunt knives slicing across Miller's back. The boiling anger beneath his sweaty uniform made him feel suffocated, humiliated, as if, unless he slammed the arrogant man before him to the ground, he would no longer be a cop. Miller clenched his teeth, pressing his face close to the man's, his voice hoarse with a crude curse. "You want to teach me how to do my job? You think those cameras will save you?" After spitting the words out, he swung his arm hard, shoving the man back from the stone bench. The man stepped back half a step, his foot crunching on dry grass, but strangely, his eyes remained calm, as if this whole scene was just a routine drama. Miller growled like a caged beast. He lunged forward, grabbed the man's vest, yanking hard until the man lost balance, his knee buckling onto the dusty grass. Harris stiffened, gripping the gun handle at his side but not drawing it, his eyes scanning the crowd holding up phones, capturing every second. A woman gasped, "Oh my God, don't hit him!" But Miller heard nothing except the pounding blood rushing in his ears. "Face down! Hands behind your back!" Miller barked loudly, ordering both the crowd and the raging storm inside his head. The man tilted his head, looking straight into Miller's eyes, his voice low and cold. "Is this really how you want to handle it?" The question was not a challenge, but a warning, hitting Miller's chest hard, yet it did not make him hesitate. He grabbed the man's neck, forcing him face down onto the dusty grass that had sunk into a shallow groove. Miller's left hand twisted the man's arm behind his back, while his right hand snapped the handcuffs closed, the metallic click echoing like the slamming of a prison gate. Harris swallowed dryly, watching the veins on the man's neck bulge like steel cables, his gray vest smeared with dirt. A camera zoomed in sharply, capturing Miller's hand pressing down on the neck and the other fastening the cuffs on the man's wrists. A clear, undeniable image. Shouts erupted. A young man yelled, "Keep filming, get a clear shot! He didn't do anything!" An old woman nearby sobbed, her thin hand reaching out as if to pull Miller away but only managing to grab Harris's coat. Harris stepped back, waving off those trying to rush forward. Step back, let the police do their job." His voice trembled, no one believing his confidence amid the chaos. On the grass, the handcuffed man lay on his side, breathing shallow, but his eyes still open, cold as steel, fixed on Miller, who was panting with bulging neck veins. A phrase slipped out quietly like a breeze, but heavy as a hammer, striking Miller's chest. "You will pay for this decision." In that brief moment, even though Miller's hand remained on the man's vest collar, deep in his eyes, what was about to collapse was not power, but the mask he had worn for years. The sound of sirens cracked the air as a black SUV sped onto the grass near the patrol car, the front tires leaving broken, curved tracks before screeching to a halt so sharply that Harris heard the brakes squeal by his ear. Two doors opened almost simultaneously and two men in dark suits with neat haircuts and black glasses covering nearly half their faces stepped out with brisk, purposeful strides, measured yet confident, as if each step had been planned. Miller startled, turning sharply, his hand still ready to hold the man's neck. His eyes flashed with suspicion, his voice hoarse and angry. "This area is locked down. Who are you? Who gave you?" His command was cut off as the taller man in black suit raised his hand, pulled out a slim leather wallet, and flipped it open smoothly. "FBI, release him. Immediately." The last words hit Miller like a bullet. Harris stood frozen. To him, the FBI badge reflected the sunlight, sparkling like a hammer shattering Miller's illusion of control in a single breath. His mouth opened, voice weak. "FBI? Federal agents?" His hand brushed the gun handle, then dropped helplessly, unsure how to hide his shaking eyes. The handcuffed man on the grass gave a slight smirk, a half smile, nearly mocking, his eyes shooting straight at Miller. The man still poised as if about to slam someone's face into the ground, his voice steady and low as a whisper. "Now you understand, Miller." An FBI agent stepped forward, brushing Miller's hand away, like swatting a stubborn child. The agent's thick, firm hand grasped the handcuffs, twisting hard until the metal clicked and the locks sprang open. The man was pulled to his feet, adjusting his collar, the dusty gray vest unable to erase his usual calm demeanor. Cheers, whispers, and the rapid tapping of phone cameras erupted like waves. A student live streaming yelled into the camera, "Everyone see this? Oh my God, he's FBI. Chicago police just arrested a federal agent in the park. Oh my God, share it, share it." A woman clutched her chest, exhaling as if witnessing a rare accident. An old lady laughed harshly, her eyes full of disdain at Miller. Miller stood stiff as a wooden post in the grass, his lips twitching without a sound. He looked at Harris, whose eyes were fixed on the FBI logo on the badge the agent still held loosely. In Harris's mind, every piece of Miller's puzzle, his boasting about old cases, Harris's previous suspicions he never dared to explore, all played out in slow motion before shattering right in front of him. The man just freed from cuffs still bore red marks on his wrists. He glanced over the crowd, filming relentlessly, lightly tapped an agent's shoulder, then casually brushed the dust off his sleeve, tilting his face toward Miller. His words were quiet but caught fully by every live streaming phone. "Your file? We've been watching long enough, and this clip is only the beginning of the evidence." A light breeze swept across the grass. carrying murmurs, live stream notifications, and the pounding of Harris's heart like a shattered drum on a quiet Chicago noon. Moments before, this place buried part of a loudmouth cop's career. Miller stood frozen in the midst of the trampled grass, scattered footprints and gray vest dust still falling around him. His face had turned so pale that the freckles on his nose disappeared beneath the cold sweat streaming down. His mouth hung open, attempting to utter an excuse, but only a harsh hiss slipped through his clenched teeth. Both his hands trembled, one still stained with dust from when he had pinned the FBI man's head to the ground. Harris stood slightly behind, his gaze fixed on Miller's back. The boss, who had once yelled at him like garbage, forced him into silence and taught him that to survive you must learn to bite back. But now, Miller's shadow cast on the grass threatened no one. It was distorted and faltering, like an old beast about to fall into a trap. Inside, Harris stirred a mix of emotions, some worry, a surge of suppressed satisfaction that rose and was quickly swallowed, and a deep fear that he might be dragged down by the same bloodline Miller had inadvertently severed. In front, the remaining FBI agent wasted no words. He held Miller's arm tightly like iron clamps, regardless of Miller being much bigger. Nearby, the handcuffed FBI man, now freed, flicked his arm sharply, shaking off the dust covering his vest sleeve. The lining beneath was frayed and torn. A faint scratch ran across the back of the jacket, but he merely waved his hand lightly, as if dusting off meaningless sand, then adjusted his tie, his expression cold and indifferent. The clicking of phones and live stream notifications beeped repeatedly. A brown-skinned student tilted his camera, zooming in close on Miller's face, which seemed on the verge of tears but uttering no sound. The live clip exploded with comments racing by. "See his face, did you see? Boss Miller, so proud. Arrested the wrong FBI agent. Zoom in on his face, man. Wow, Chicago, this is epic." An old woman sitting on a nearby flower bed clicked her tongue as if watching a clown perform. Miller heard everything. His ears burned as if someone had pressed a burning cigarette to them. He turned to Harris, eyes red and voice hoarse, rasping through his throat. "Say something, Harris. You have to say something to them. You know me. They're misunderstanding." But Harris only shook his head, stepping back half a pace, his heel grinding against a patch of grass worn bare. In Harris's eyes, Miller now looked like a rotting piece of meat exposed in the market. No one wanted to touch it for fear of spoiling their own clothes. The remaining FBI agent flipped open a black notebook, drawing a pin as quickly as one draws a gun. He scanned the sea of cameras pointed directly at him, his voice cold and curt. "Anyone recording, preserve the original files. We will need everything. Anyone willing to testify, stay in contact with the FBI, keep filming, get a clear shot." The command sounded like a death sentence. The park breeze carried the smell of car smoke mixed with damp earth from the grass, where Miller had just knocked down a federal agent. But now, the strongest stench came from the rotten power Miller had boasted about for years, never imagining it would be exposed by the lenses of ordinary people, right in broad daylight, right in Chicago. The FBI man lightly tapped his hand on Miller's shoulder, shaking off the dust clinging to the fold of his jacket's back. The tear became more visible in the sunlight, but no one cared about the rip. All eyes, cameras, and breaths focused on his firm step moving directly toward Miller. Under the harsh park sunlight, the bystanders seemed pushed back by an invisible chill. Instinctively making way, Harris pressed close against the trunk of a nearby maple tree, head bowed low, as if afraid someone would drag his name out in front of this crowd. He stopped just inches from Miller. They faced each other, one trembling with bloodshot eyes from the strain, the other's gaze sharp as a cold blade. His voice rose, low, but cutting through everyone's ears. "You think you're smart, good at suppressing the common people, good at erasing records? Let me tell you, everything is stored where you will never reach." Miller opened his mouth, his throat dry as sand. Broken, muffled groans escaped. You have no right. I was just doing my job. I... Those words mixed with the student's giggles, The constant clicking of cameras and the whistle of the wind rustling through the grass, the FBI man tilted his head, bending close to Miller's ear so much that even Harris, watching from afar, felt a chill. He whispered just loud enough for Miller to hear and for Harris nearby to shudder. "You destroyed yourself in front of millions, and you dragged all the vultures in the department into the light. I thank you, Miller, truly." The thanks sounded like applause for a soul digging its own grave. Miller stiffened, eyes wide and glassy as if wanting to cry, but tears dared not fall. The surrounding crowd erupted. Livestream comments skyrocketed. "Epic! Is this real life? Chicago police arresting an FBI agent in the park. Legendary!" The student stuck close to Miller, aiming his camera so near he captured every sweat pore on Miller's forehead. The caption scrolled in red, "A legend with broken wings in the heart of Chicago noon." Miller bowed his head, shoulders sagging as if cut loose, his breath exhaling with a sharp sob stuck in his throat. Harris stepped fully to the edge of the grass, eyes lowered, unwilling to let anyone's camera catch his face. The FBI man didn't look at Miller again. He turned his shoulder, pulled out his phone from his pocket, tapped a few keys, then spoke softly to the other agent. "Pull out all the old files. Starting today, we begin." His voice was cold as a hammer, striking a coffin lid. A strong gust swept through, scattering maple leaves around dust-covered vest heels, carrying murmurs spreading like waves ready to become a storm online. At the center of that wave, the name Miller officially became a living joke, shared across every corner of Chicago in just one scorching afternoon. The patrol car rolled away from the park, the news spreading like spilled ink, the crowd behind still lingering, the camera still recording. Inside the vehicle cabin, the atmosphere was thicker than the cigarette smoke trapped beneath Miller's seat from the morning shift. Miller sat in the passenger seat, his shirt collar askew, dust marks still smeared on the shoulder of the gray FBI man's vest, now reversed onto his sleeve. Harris gripped the steering wheel tightly, veins on his arm bulging white, eyes fixed on the road, but his mind replayed Miller's harsh expression, pressing someone's head down onto the grass in front of dozens of cameras, then unmasked in just 3 sharp letters, FBI. No one spoke during the first stretch, only the sound of wind slipping through the slightly opened window. Miller did not move at all, his gaze locked on the line of cars ahead, as if trying to pierce through them to escape the truth exposed under the midday sun. Harris swallowed dryly, his throat feeling as rough as sandpaper. He drew a breath, clenched the wheel harder, then spoke, his voice sounding off-key, as if a wrong note was inserted into a tense string section. "Boss, why did you do that? You knew exactly who he was." Miller did not turn his head. His eyelids twitched, the pulse in his neck throbbed, but his mouth stayed tightly sealed, not uttering a single word. Seeing this, a wave of frustration suddenly overwhelmed Harris's fear, burning down his spine. He hissed through clenched teeth, "How many cases like this already, boss? How many times have you hidden the truth? You taught me how to silence people, told me to play smart. Turns out you're just smart enough to drag me down with you to die." Miller snapped his head around sharply. The sudden turn made Harris's back stiffen. His arm wavered slightly on the wheel. The car swerved briefly, then steadied. Miller's bloodshot eyes, breath hot against Harris's ear, growled, "Shut up! You're my soldier, Harris. I saved you countless times, you've forgotten? You keep your mouth shut, I'll handle everything. But if you even make a sound, slip a word to those bastards, I'll drag you down to die with me, got it? I mean what I say." Harris dared not face him, but his eyes stuck to the rearview mirror. In the reflection, the once authoritative Miller now panted heavily, like an exhausted dog. Harris swallowed hard, the smell of sweat on the collar mixing with the sharp disinfectant scent lingering on the seat churned his stomach, but deep in his chest something fluttered, no longer just fear. He pressed the gas lightly, the car vibrated, eyes fixed on the road ahead, while the same sentence echoed in his mind. I have to escape, his shadow before it strangles me. As the patrol car eased into the parking lot behind the headquarters, Miller slammed the door open like a wild animal chained too long. His eyes flicked to Harris, his voice hoarse, as if shouting beyond his limit. "Don't say a word to anyone. When I say one, I mean one. Understand?" Harris nodded mechanically, his eyes avoiding Miller's gaze, dropping instead to the edge of a stack of messy files on the boss's office desk, near the window. The faded ink on the cover still revealed key phrases: detention without warrant, suspect non-resistant, unauthorized search. Harris's throat tightened, only one thought trapped in his mind. Was I stupid or blind not to see this sooner? Harris slid to a tiny desk tucked away near the hallway. He collapsed into the chair, his hands still trembling when his phone vibrated violently. The screen lit up with a message from an unknown number. "Want to survive? Take Miller's files out. FBI is waiting." Harris choked back a breath, his heart skipping a beat. His fingers typed trembling 3 words. "Who is this?" No reply came, just blinking ellipses that vanished. Fear gripped his neck, but curiosity roared louder. Harris took a deep breath, glanced left and right, then pulled the pile of Miller's files thrown atop a cabinet. His hand slipped into a small drawer beneath the desk, gently prying open a lock that only Miller had the key to. The creaking hinge sounded like nails scraping ears, but inside came the sharp scent of old paper mixed with antiseptic. A neat stack of old reports lay waiting to be examined. Stamps in red ink tilted across the pages read "Confidential," "Internal Handling," some complaint forms with fingerprints below, but the complainants' names were blacked out. Harris flipped through pages back and forth, his spine chilled stiff. Every time he said "done," it meant stuffing it in here, hiding everything. One crumpled paper, coffee-stained at the corner, showed the victim's name clearly: Jerome Carter. Harris shivered suddenly. The name Miller once drunkenly dragged Harris behind the garage, boasting, "I handled that guy and no one can dig him up." Now it was right here, glaring, alive in the files. Harris swallowed dry, grabbed his phone, trembling as if holding a sharp blade. His finger tapped the camera, snapping multiple angles quickly. "If I send this out, who dies first, me or Miller?" The meeting room door burst open, cutting off his thoughts. Miller stepped out, hair disheveled, tie crooked from his collar, bloodshot eyes sweeping across Harris's desk like a hawk spotting a mouse stirring in the grass. Harris pretended to lower his eyes, closed the phone, pocketed it, heart pounding like an alarm drum. In his mind, he repeated a quiet vow: "I'll do it my way. No one will drag me down any further." The hallway wind slipped through the half-open door, carrying the burnt sunlight and city sirens, ready to wash away the rotten stench cracking apart inside this very headquarters. And the next morning, Chicago barely warmed before it was buzzing non-stop with a single hashtag: racist cop. A clip less than 1 minute long showed Miller pressing the collar of a black man's vest down onto the grass, the metallic screech of handcuffs, then the sharp shout, "FBI!" cutting through like a blade slicing off a mask of power. The clip was tightly edited, overlaid with jarring music, turning into dozens of memes spreading across Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook within hours. The hashtags Chicago Police, FBI, and Expose Miller surged to #1 trending, spreading like wildfire. Netizens showed no mercy for a second. Miller's face was captured from every angle, when he glared and shouted orders, when he tugged the FBI agent's sleeve, when he stood frozen, hearing the warning, "You will pay for this decision." Last night's live-streaming students became golden witnesses, their personal channels gaining tens of thousands of followers just from a clip of a cop arresting an FBI agent. Black communities across states shared the video as proof. We are not paranoid. Racism is real, violence is real, and even federal agents are not immune. Online, lawyers, influencers, and journalists sitting in New York or Los Angeles typed relentlessly, "Miller must be suspended immediately. FBI must launch a full investigation into the Chicago Patrol Unit." Where is the city government? A famous civil rights lawyer even declared live, "If FBI doesn't act, I will sue the Chicago Police Department to the Supreme Court." Supporting hashtags like Justice for Black Agents, Expose Miller, and Accountability Now mushroomed overnight. Miller sat cramped in a narrow living room, his t-shirt rumpled, eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. The TV in front kept replaying the clip, making him want to smash the screen, but he dared not. His left hand scrolled through hateful comments. "Get out of the force, you bloodthirsty dog. You will pay, Miller. No one is safe with cops like this but the law." Sometimes he slammed his phone hard on the table, mumbling curses, but seconds later picked it up to scroll again, like an addict torturing himself. A knock at the door startled Miller. A young plainclothes officer handed him a red-stamped envelope. "Emergency summons. The superiors want you here this morning." Miller snatched it, hiding trembling eyes, gripping the envelope until the edges curled. Across the city, Harris lay with his hands over his forehead, eyes wide on the bright newsfeed filled with his boss's face covered in scathing captions. His phone vibrated again, the familiar anonymous message. "Ready?" Harris didn't reply, exhaling deeply to suppress the shaking in his spine. In his mind, he muttered like a mantra, "Now there's no running from this scandal." By noon, the park that once had only a few benches was packed with reporters from all major and minor channels. Microphones aimed in every direction, camera cables stretched across the grass, news vans flashing blue and red lights, blocking a whole street outside the gate. The bench where Miller had pinned the FBI agent's collar became a holy ground for the press. Last night's student witnesses, now golden witnesses, were grabbed by their shirts and backpacks, microphones shoved in their faces constantly. An elderly woman, trembling, pulled her bag full of vegetables and sat on the flower bed edge. The camera zoomed in, and she nodded, pulling her mask aside. "I stood there. I saw him stomp on that man's collar. Luckily, there was an FBI agent, or no one would have saved him." Her words went live on local TV, triggering cheers from netizens. But instead, a young, cheeky student pulled out his phone, showing a national news reporter. "I have another angle clip," when he shouted at the FBI agent, "Get down. Want to buy the original? Trust me, this one's better than the live stream." The sound of sirens, urgent questions, and camcorders flickering on and off pulled the small park into unprecedented chaos. Not far away, inside the police headquarters, Miller appeared, his uniform ironed to show every crease, collar tight and flushed red from sleepless nights, dark purple shadows under his eyes. He pushed open the door and walked past rows of desks. Colleagues' eyes briefly fixed on his back, then dropped away. The creak of chairs and whispers stopped abruptly when Miller glared. But now that glare was useless, like a toothless tiger standing in an empty cage. Harris sat with his head down behind the file office glass. The heavy footsteps of Miller on the stone floor made him flinch. Their eyes met briefly. Harris tried to shrink away, but it was too late. Miller sneered, teeth grinding. "I'm still here, Harris. Don't even think about betraying me, got it? One word out of either of you and you're both dead before me." Harris swallowed hard, blinking rapidly, lips pressed tight, not daring to respond. At the end of the hallway, in front of the chief's office, Miller stopped. The gray door was shut tight. Inside came the sharp, authoritative voice like a hammer striking iron. "Miller, get in here now. Do you realize you just blew up all of Chicago?" Miller clenched his fists, knuckles white, sweat running down his neck, soaking his uniform collar. He swallowed dry, whispered just loud enough for himself, "You have to survive, Miller. You have to silence them all, even if it means dragging the whole lot into the mud." His large hand pressed on the door handle, his breath trembling like a caged beast waiting for the blade. Outside in the hallway, Harris stood frozen, hearing the hinge screech open, then silence as the door slammed shut, blocking all sound inside. Outside, news vans still poured into the park, while inside the headquarters a scandal was about to burst open, exposing every rotten core Miller himself planted with the handcuffs slamming on a federal agent in the park. The closed meeting room on the third floor, once reserved solely for the inspection team, now remained shut tight, the curtains drawn close to block any curious eyes from the corridor. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of air conditioning and the musty smell of worn papers. A thick dossier, along with a hefty printed report from online sources, was slammed down onto the wooden table. The first page slipped open, revealing a close-up photo of Miller, caught on camera in the clip. His eyes, bloodshot with veins visible, gripping the neck of an FBI agent. The chief's voice slammed harder on the table than the stack of papers. "You turned a public place into a scandal den, Miller? Do you think the FBI will just let this slide? Are you making this whole agency a laughing stock?" Miller leaned forward, both hands pressing on the table, his eyes flashing fiercely. His voice was hoarse, scraping painfully through a constricted throat. "He was suspicious. He's a great actor. I followed the security protocol. Who would have guessed?" That defense poured fuel onto the fire already roaring under the chief's neck. The old man slammed his fist beside his chair, leaning in to glare straight at Miller, his breath reeking of tobacco and sweat-stained uniform collar. What protocol? The protocol to handcuff a federal agent? The protocol to shove him down right in front of hundreds of cameras? The protocol that turned young Harris into an unwilling accomplice? The veins on Miller's forehead throbbed visibly, dark red, as if about to burst. He pulled his hands from the table and suddenly hammered his fist onto the wooden surface, making the documents shake violently. A corner of the report slipped and fell onto the tile floor. He screamed until his voice cracked, spitting saliva onto the chief's collar. "They're idiots. Those black guys deserve to be tied up. I've done this for over 10 years and no one dared to say a word. The social media crowd just yells, but even the lawyers shut up. Who here is paid by the agency that dares to—" The chief stepped back half a pace, his face pale, hands on hips as if afraid letting go would send Miller flying off the chair. His voice was hoarse but resolute, cutting through the madness. "You're crazy, Miller. You're dragging the whole agency through the mud. Understand? The FBI has sent an official request to hand over your files within 24 hours. Don't dream of any protection for even one more minute." Outside, an old security guard leaned against the wall near the slightly ajar door, ear pressed close to the wooden panel. The sound of fist pounding made him jump, eyes darting around before swallowing dryly. A young officer in a faded shirt cautiously approached and whispered just loud enough for the two to hear, "Harris heard that? He's really lost it. He's going to drag everyone down with him." Though the door remained closed, the growls, shouts, and crashing of furniture inside leaked out like steam escaping a cracked pressure cooker. In a corner of the corridor, Harris crouched behind a column, clutching his belt strap, his face gray and drawn, ears glued to every fragment of sound slipping outside. "Deserved to be tied up. Social media crowd, bury all those traitors," words slicing close to his neck like a cold blade, chilling his spine. Harris sat hunched on a padded chair lined up against the interrogation room corridor wall, his back pressed to the wall, tightly gripping his phone with palms slick as if just dipped in cold water. Every punch Miller landed on the thick wooden door startled Harris, fingers clenching the plastic casing so hard his nails dug into his skin. Inside his mind, overlapping thoughts raced. "He's really out of control. If I speak, I die first." Suddenly, the phone screen lit up, an anonymous message appearing, sharp as a knife slicing through his tangled thoughts. "Harris, you don't have time. Want to live? Turn against him." Harris nearly held his breath, thumb trembling so much he hit the wrong key. He typed back a message without accents, voice caught in his throat. "Who? F-I-I? Or who?" No reply came. Inside the room, Miller's growl stretched on like a wounded beast, growling, then abruptly fading for a beat before crashing back with the sound of a chair scraping loudly. The phone vibrated again, this time not a message but a call from a strange number with a long string of digits. Harris answered, his arm goosebumping. On the other end, a man's voice, deep and slow, carefully enunciated each word as if setting a trap. "Harris, I know what you're holding. Don't ask who I am. I'm not FBI, nor am I here to threaten you. I'm the one who's backed Miller all this time, kept his seat, kept seats like yours secure while you get paid." Harris swallowed dryly, staring blankly at the chipped corridor floor, words stuck in his throat. The man's voice flowed steadily, like dripping water. "But this game has gone too far. Miller can't control his mouth anymore, and you can't expect the FBI to clean you up. Once it's dirty, it stays dirty, Harris. Do you understand?" Harris's throat burned dry. He barely whispered into the phone. What do you want?" The other side scoffed, a laugh colder than Miller's scream. "Be obedient. Don't open your mouth. When Miller survives this storm, you'll get a good position, transferred to another team, a raise, and a clean record. But if you betray, you vanish before Miller gets dragged out. Simple. Who cares about some low-level cop?" The call ended. The harsh dial tone struck Harris's ear like a hammer hitting an empty drum. He pressed his hand to his forehead, sweat matting his bangs. His wide eyes stared at the cracked ceiling's faded paint. "I'm a pawn, caught between the FBI and the dirty powers. If I play this game, what will I have left?" Miller's roar shattered the wall, slamming into Harris's spine. "I'll bury all those traitors, understand? Bury them all!" Harris shuddered, curling up, clutching his phone like a ticking bomb about to explode. Only one dark thought remained in his mind, thick as the gray smoke seeping from the cracked concrete ceiling. Either I stay silent, or I die, or maybe both. Harris sat motionless inside the car cabin, the parking lot lights casting a pale yellow streak across the dusty windshield. His mind felt as cloudy as the last foam in a beer glass, no longer able to distinguish between fear or numbness. Miller's roaring voice from the meeting room still echoed in his ears, mixed with the deep, threatening tone from the anonymous call. All these merged into a single toxic phrase, spinning in his head. "Silent, you die slowly. Speak out, you die fast. But at least, you can drag him down with you." His fingers trembled slightly as he scrolled through his contacts, passing a few colleagues and some managers, before stopping at the one name he had sworn never to get involved with. Dylan M., a freelance reporter, notorious for digging into scandals that big newspapers feared to touch, who had once chased the story of a police officer killing a black suspect 3 years ago, a case Harris knew Miller had cleaned up by forcing a witness to disappear. He typed a short, accent-free message, leaving no room for misinterpretation. "I have what you need. Tonight, the usual place. Alone." After sending it, nausea rose sharply in his throat. Harris tilted his head forward, resting it lightly on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the blurred high beams through the unshed tears. Night fell swiftly, as if closing a theater curtain. Harris drove through a few deserted streets near an old industrial zone, his tires tracing the cold, damp road. Near a dimly lit bar, where he last met Dylan, to quietly suppress an investigative report, his car slowed to a stop. Dylan sat in a corner of the bar, wearing a faded denim jacket, casually swirling a beer bottle in his hand. He barely glanced at Harris when he closed the door and then returned his gaze to the bottle label, as if indifferent. Harris pulled out a chair and sat down without greeting. Inside his jacket pocket, a slight bulge revealed a hard rectangular object. He took out a black USB stick and placed it carefully on the wooden table near a wet pad. Harris's voice broke dryly. "If I disappear, you know what to do. No explanations needed." Dylan raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth twisting bitterly, his voice low enough not to be swallowed by the bar noise. "Do you understand who you're playing with, Harris? Last time you made me shut up, now you're flipping on your boss. You really think you'll get away with it?" Harris laughed, a sound like a drunk's, despite having not taken a single sip. I know, but damn it, I have nothing left to lose. I'd rather die dirty than live holding my breath listening to him bark on." Dylan picked up the USB, rolling the plastic end between his fingers without taking his eyes off Harris, a young cop who looked no different from a runaway kid, sneaky and desperate, but ready to laugh in fear. Outside, the wind from the industrial zone howled through the door crack like a distant train whistle, pushing Chicago's night into a darker shade of gloom. Dylan drove through the night, left hand on the wheel but eyes still flicking to the black USB plugged into the car's charging port. He did not trust Harris completely. A rookie cop like him could be both a good guy, bait, or worse, a planted pawn with a bomb waiting for someone to uncover the nest and explode everything. But curiosity gnawed at Dylan's mind, as always. He plugged the USB into his battered laptop at the shared office with 3 other freelancers. The hard drive whined once before revealing a pile of files labeled internal, no network storage. The screen shimmered with numerous reports. Times, locations, patrol check signatures, complaints stamped in red with resolved, but with an inked note underneath, file missing, original record not retrievable. Dylan scrolled, eyes glued to the screen, fingers tapping quickly as if fearing a sudden intrusion. One folder caught his eye immediately. Jerome Carter, 2018. Opening it, a profile picture appeared, a young black man's bruised face with a note about a skull injury below. A faintly handwritten note flickered in the lower right corner. Detained illegally, no search warrant. Miller intervened directly, forced family to withdraw the complaint. Removed from database, July 2019. Dylan leaned back, swallowing hard. All the scattered clues Harris had provided earlier now formed a sharp scythe, pressing down on Miller's neck, and anyone backing him. The shabby rented room creaked with mouse-scurrying sounds, but the walls were plastered with messy, sticky notes. Dylan stood, pulling pins to piece together the fragments. A red thread stretched across Miller's photo, crossing over Carter's name and sweeping past blurred marks, wrongly accused. Trial refused. Dylan muttered, twisting the red thread into a bundle. Not just one case, it's an entire cleanup network, a demonic police gang lubricated by black blood. Across the city, Harris poured whiskey with a trembling hand, spilling half a glass onto the table. His phone lay face down, screen dark, like a mirror reflecting his bloodshot, hollow eyes. He leaned back, staring at the flashing streetlights through the window, his mind replaying the question again and again. Have I sold my soul to some demon already? And now, how do I buy it back? At dawn, Dylan held his phone, dialing the number of the only trustworthy colleague, his voice hoarse from sleeplessness, his words a final order. Prepare to publish this by tomorrow morning. If I don't make it back, you know what to do. Don't bury it like they buried the others. At the same time, a camera focused directly on Harris, his head bowed on the table, the whiskey glass tipped over, soaking old papers. His whispered words slipped through the slightly open window. At least once to be human. The night wind surged, carrying that grim phrase deep into the city, still roaring for justice. Miller stepped out of the emergency exit at the end of the third-floor hallway without anyone noticing. He pulled up the collar of his coat, pulled his hood over his head, and covered nearly half of his face with a mask. His hunched, sneaky posture made him look more like a petty drug addict than a police officer who once proudly looked down on the entire city. A brief message flashed on his phone with a single command: alone. The underground parking lot was cold and smelled of gasoline. The flickering fluorescent lights seemed to challenge Miller's already frayed nerves. He glanced back at the camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling, then veered sharply toward a concrete pillar, slipping into the shadows to avoid the security eye. A black sedan, shiny like a serpent's back wet with night dew, was parked right by the emergency exit, its rear door opening quietly. Miller peeked inside the cabin, seeing the driver's back fully covered in a black coat, the cap pulled low, face hidden in the shadow of the rearview mirror. Without asking a word, he slid into the back seat and slammed the door shut. The sedan rolled smoothly. Headlights abruptly turned off, tires screeching softly against the concrete with a sound like a snake slithering. The driver did not turn his head, but reclined the seat slightly and spoke in a dry voice that fell like a stone dropped down a well. Fasten your seatbelt. There are no accidents here, only disasters. The car glided through the guard gate without anyone checking a pass. In less than 10 minutes, it slipped out of the busy streets and headed straight into a cluster of old warehouses on the edge of the industrial belt. a place where petty thieves often hid stolen vehicles and local police ignored due to insufficient night patrol staff. Miller rested his head against the fogged glass, hearing his heart pounding loudly, as if reminding him, "You're not a wolf, you're just a dog, and dogs have to behave." The abandoned warehouse had a partially closed metal shutter, a dim yellow light cast over rusted containers. The driver cut the engine, turned to look at Miller for just a second, then nodded. "Go in." Miller stepped out, his feet splashing in an oil-stained puddle, his shoes making soft crackling sounds like a death drum. Inside the warehouse, the smell of burning cigarettes mixed with leaking gasoline from old barrels. A man stood with his hands clasped behind his back, salt and pepper hair, shoulders covered by a finely tailored vest, collar showing handcrafted seams. His hands wore shiny black leather gloves, holding a cigarette with the last drag being smoked. The man did not turn around, but exhaled smoke, his voice deep and hoarse, steady like a bent steel ruler. "You spat into this stinking mess yourself. What else do you want now?" Miller swallowed hard, feeling his throat scratchy as if rubbed with sandpaper. He tried to keep a firm tone, but the end of his sentence broke, like a dog tucking its tail. "I've cleaned up your trash for years. I only need you to shut the reporters up. I nailed Harris. I know he's the weakest link." A mocking laugh came from the man's vest-covered back. Cold, dry, a burning cigarette dropped onto the concrete floor left a glowing red mark. His voice rasped again. "Without you, we survived just fine. But with you, we're more likely to be dragged into the light. You get it, Miller?" He understood, but still forced himself to pretend he didn't, like every dog hoping for one last bone before being buried deep in the sand. The man took his last drag, pressed the cigarette down with a polished black shoe, extinguishing it. The smell of burning hit Miller's nose, making him swallow dryly to keep his voice steady. The man stepped forward, his leather shoes striking the concrete with a sound thick with power. He said nothing at first, then raised his gloved hand and gently patted Miller's shoulder. A light gesture, but his words cut like steel. "You're just a guard dog, Miller. Bark well, you get a bone. Bark badly, I'll shoot you." Miller flinched, but didn't step back. He knew this hand, this shoulder pat, was the light tap before a useless dog was thrown into a sack and tossed into the river. The man's eyes glanced over Miller's face briefly, then down to the warehouse floor, as if looking at replaceable trash. He spoke evenly, without hesitation or extra breath. "You think you're smart? You think only you know how to break justice? How many like you are in this department? How many bosses have held files, issued sweep orders, buried complaints? You're just a rusty screw. Remove you, replace you, the machine still runs. Understand?" Miller struggled to raise his head, his lips so dry he had to lick them before saying, "But you still have ways to clean up the media, right? Shut the press, delete clips? I'll behave. I'll finish Harris, then disappear." The man curled his lips, unclear whether it was a smile or just a habitual twitch. He pulled out his phone, his gloved finger typing a brief message, the sound of tapping more chilling than Miller's gasping breath. "If you behave, I'll clear the way for you to leave Chicago. I'll arrange clean papers, make your records spotless like a mirror. Move to another state, new name, new job. As long as you keep your mouth shut, understand?" Miller swallowed dryly, his face pale as ash, sweat trickling down his forehead following an old broken nose scar he once proudly called his badge of honor when he still commanded the patrol team. He hesitated, voice rasping through a crooked horn. "What about Harris? He'll ruin everything if he's not stopped." The man laughed, this time definitely a real laugh, but dry, like a saw blade cutting thin steel. "He disappears before you. Don't worry. If he talks first, I'll cut out his tongue myself. A rebellious pup buried without regret." Miller stood like a concrete statue. He clenched his fist until his nails pierced the palm, but the mix of anger, fear, and cowardice stuck in his throat, unable to spit out. He bowed his head slightly, gritting his teeth. "I'll behave as long as I live." The black car's lights flashed like a wild beast's eye emerging from the darkness of the warehouse. Miller stepped back, heard the car door open and then close behind him. The sedan slid away smoothly, tires humming quietly, trailing the image of a greedy snake swallowing its own tail to escape the blades of even bigger predators. The special meeting room on the 4th floor of the police headquarters was packed. Not because of the number of people, but because of the suffocating tension among the uniforms, accustomed to sitting quietly on leather chairs, nodding over files, and leaving safely. The fluorescent lights shone directly onto the old wooden table, revealing the coffee stains spread around a forgotten cup from the previous meeting. What about? The door opened quietly, catching the guard on duty off guard before he could stand at attention. The black man whom Miller had once forced down onto the grass in the park entered, his gray suit sharply pressed, white collar as bright as if tearing through the dirty memory of being dragged before live stream cameras. The bruises on his neck had faded, leaving only a faint purple mark as a reminder to everyone in the room about who had humiliated whom. He did not shake anyone's hand or greet anyone. His eyes scanned the room, passing the empty seat Miller should have occupied, then stopped at the chief leaning on a thick file. A veteran officer mouthed quietly, his voice trembling like smoke inhaled cold. "This is the first time the FBI has dug this deep, digging into the guts of this place." The agent heard it, but showed no reaction. He pushed aside the black leather folder, pulling from a thin briefcase a stack of documents stamped with bright red federal seals. His voice was firm and direct, without beating around the bush. "What you see online is only the surface. Miller is just a matchstick. It burns itself to reveal the gasoline scent on this floor." He placed the folder on the table, tapping his fingertip lightly on the smooth cover. "This is a list of seals, signatures, and intervention orders that made files disappear. Do you see your name here? If not, yet, don't celebrate. Sometimes paper only shows half the truth." A slide appeared on the hastily hung projector screen at the head of the table. Enlarged images showed Miller kneeling in the warehouse, a deputy police director's nameplate, and an inspection order with a removed timestamp restored by spectral technology. The projector's light swept over every face, growing pale. The shadow of truth now magnified several times over the powerful influence they thought they controlled tightly. The agent clasped his hands behind his back, paced slowly as if counting every bowed neck. His voice remained steady, cold, but sounding like a nail driven into rotten wood. "Those with blood on their hands will wash it with their own blood. Those who stay silent still have hope of keeping their position and family safe. But those who betray, I promise, they will face court before they can buy a plane ticket out of Chicago." A long breath escaped somewhere, slipping through the sealed door crack, carrying a thick smell of anxiety that filled the room, already saturated with old paper and the sweat of long shifts. Outside, a security camera slowly rotated on a partially open door, but control was no longer in the hands of those accustomed to twisting justice into a game of power sharing. The special meeting room fell silent for exactly 3 heartbeats after the agent's final warning. His hand slowly rose, 2 fingers tapping lightly on the edge of the file, the tiny sound echoing like a coffin nail in the minds of the sweating uniforms. The door suddenly swung open. The guard who had been outside quietly stepped in, his eyes no longer tired but sharp and cold, flipping open his breast pocket to reveal a neat badge, FBI. Before surprised mouths could close, the agent glanced toward the end of the table where the internal secretary still stood shyly holding a coffee pot for the chief. The woman set down the pot, straightened her vest slightly, and pulled out a black badge trimmed with silver. An older officer near the head of the table blurted out, his voice cracking like a snapped guitar string, "You have been an insider all along?" The agent did not turn, but shrugged slightly as if shaking dust off his lapel. "We never left, just waiting for the right moment to squeeze the snake's neck, and today the snake's neck is exposed." In the hallway, Harris crouched behind a wall near a ventilation window. The agent's voice, the revelation of the insider, and the heavy breathing intertwined like hammer blows along his spine. His hand gripped the cold phone. A single question drilled deep in his mind, choking him. Am I being watched every step? Do I still have any way to breathe? Inside, the agent slowly gathered the scattered files he had displayed, his voice low but tireless. Lock all escape routes. All files will be public. Don't expect to bribe the press anymore. Anyone disappearing tonight will be considered a fugitive. A young officer at the corner was about to stand and argue, but the agent's piercing gaze stopped him mid-sentence. Outside the door, Harris took a step back, his back against the rough wall, struggling to catch his breath as a cold chill ran down his spine. The ceiling security camera rotated slowly, the agent's face suddenly locking eyes with the lens, his lips curling into a cold curve, words falling like both a sentence and the final cut to the snake's tail. The game has only just begun. Do you hear me, Miller? Behind the wall, Harris clenched his phone tightly, nails digging into the plastic edge, eyes vacant as the whispered words echoed down the cold hallway. Do I have any way out? Outside, Chicago shivered in the early cold winds of the season, but inside the headquarters, a nest of snakes was sweating, waiting for the real blade to strike the neck. After the incident of the park clip spreading throughout the city, Harris became a silent shadow beside Miller. He avoided the superior's gaze every time he entered the break room, merely nodding slightly to let things pass. But inside his head was crowded with questions. If he kept silent, wouldn't that be no different from colluding? Was it worth trading for the safety of his wife and children? He clearly remembered the piece of FBI file he secretly saw when the undercover agent was mistakenly arrested. It explicitly listed Miller's name on the surveillance list and included signs of corruption that Harris had always vaguely heard. An anonymous message from a reporter pushed him further onto a thin line. You know more than you think. Meet me. I will keep you safe. One quiet night on patrol, Harris gripped the steering wheel with trembling hands. Miller sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window, eyes drowsy but actually watching every movement. Harris glanced at the phone in the glove compartment and saw an unanswered message. His heart pounded. Miller turned around, his voice colder than the night wind. What are you hiding from me? Don't think I'm stupid. If you betray me now, you're digging your own grave. Harris's face stiffened. Voice barely a whisper. No, I'm just tired, boss. The clip incident shook me a bit. Miller sneered and clicked his tongue. What are you scared of? As long as you listen to me, no one will touch you. Back at home, Harris stood looking through the crack of the bedroom door, seeing his wife holding their child, sleeping soundly. He didn't dare turn on the light, only sat against the wall, exhaling a deep sigh. If you get exposed, Miller will come for them first. He turned on his phone, typed a few words to arrange a meeting with the reporter, then deleted. Typed again, then deleted once more. His hands trembled violently, sweat pouring down his neck. A few blocks away, Miller stopped the patrol car and stepped out in the middle of the late night. He held a small tracking chip and bent down under Harris's car, quickly attaching it like an old routine. Finished, he straightened up and dialed an unknown number. His hoarse voice said just enough to make anyone's hair stand on end. He's inexperienced, easy to manipulate, but I smell he's cracking. If he betrays me, I'll deal with him first. The damn media won't save him. The other end of the line was silent before hanging up without a word. The next morning, Harris took the chance to change the engine oil on the porch. He bent down to check the oil tube and suddenly noticed a small wire peeking from the chassis. Curious, he reached in to remove it. There was a shiny black tracking chip still glued on. Blood rushed to his ears, his whole body frozen. A cold shiver ran down his spine. He looked up and scanned the empty yard, but felt as if someone was lurking. His heart hammered, his collar stuck to his skin from sweat. He understood now. There was no way back. At dusk, Harris lay on the couch with his eyes wide open, his phone pressed to his chest like a lifeline. The ding of a new message startled him. He swiped it open and found only one brief line. Your wife is beautiful. Keep her safe. The streets are empty at night. Below was a distant photo, Harris's wife holding their son's hand while crossing the elementary school gate, backlit so their faces were blurred, but the long shadows of mother and child cast on the sidewalk, made Harris choke. Harris choked. He rushed to the bedroom and saw his wife and child still sleeping peacefully, the child's face flushed from tiredness. Harris sat down on the floor, hands covering his face, trying to swallow a choking sob. In his mind, there was only one name, Miller. Only he dared do such a cowardly act without leaving any trace. Early the next morning, before Harris could calm down, the gate bell rang. He opened the door to see Miller holding a paper bag and a cup of coffee, smiling like an old friend. Miller patted Harris's shoulder as if nothing had happened, glanced through the window at the child eating breakfast, then sneered, "Your little girl is quite charming, just like your wife. You better keep her well. Kidnappers have become aggressive lately." Harris's back went cold at the words, his hand gripping the coffee cup so tightly it cracked the paper cup, spilling coffee over his fingers. On the patrol car, Harris sat behind the wheel, trembling, while Miller whistled softly and occasionally glanced at the rear-view mirror to make sure Harris understood who really held the power. Throughout the shift, Harris heard only the crackling radio, unable to distinguish which car passed which street, red light or green light, just his pounding heart and the cold sweat clinging to his neck. Inside Harris's mind was a single knot. If he did nothing, Miller would keep going. If he fought back, his family would become bait for Miller's warning to anyone who dared speak out. That night, when Miller stopped to check a minor report by the roadside, Harris quickly took out a mini voice recorder hidden in the glove compartment, pressed the start button, then slipped it back. He reassured himself, just for protection, if the worst happens, at least there will be evidence. At least there will be evidence. 3 days later, on a night patrol, Harris drove while Miller sat in the passenger seat, head tilted back with eyes closed, but a smirk playing on his lips like a mind guardian. Harris swallowed hard, breathing tight in his chest. In a slip of the tongue, a question choked out like strangling himself. What if someone reports the park incident, boss? Miller opened his eyes immediately, his gaze flashing like steel struck by fire. He tilted his head slowly, the sound of a gun lock clicking softly, the cold butt pressed lightly against Harris's thigh like a reminder of his fragile life. Miller's voice was dark and venomous, dripping drop by drop. "What did you just say? Repeat it for me." The patrol car suddenly felt cramped, like a box filled with poison gas. On the dashboard, the voice recorder light blinked silently, capturing every chilling threat, while Harris swallowed his saliva, trying not to turn pale, silently praying his shaking hands wouldn't veer the wheel into the median strip. A man trapped between darkness and justice, and the shadow of threat was now closer to Harris's neck than ever before. That morning, a brief but biting headline appeared on the front page of an online newspaper, one no one expected to shake the entire Chicago Police Department. "Police officer handcuffs, FBI agent, the untold story." Beneath the headline was a photo taken from the park clip, clearly showing Miller pressing his knee into the back of a black man wearing a torn suit jacket, while behind them a crowd raised phones recording, their faces a mix of shock and anger. Linda Hooper, a stubborn freelance reporter who had patiently sent baiting messages to Harris for weeks, finally fired the first shot. In the article, she skillfully quoted anonymous remarks from an insider, Harris himself, who never dared sign his real name, but had pushed himself to the very edge of the cliff. In less than 3 hours, the article went viral. Hashtags about Miller, wrongful arrests, and the dark truths within the police department flooded Twitter, Facebook, from civil rights groups to student forums. Small news channels revisited the clip with endless commentary, even citing Miller's name linked to a failed lawsuit 5 years prior, which had been quietly buried without reason. By noon, dozens of microphones crowded in front of the police headquarters public reception room, reporters jostling for an official response. Inside, the atmosphere was thick, like gasoline meeting a cigarette ember. Miller was called into a closed meeting room. The captain, who had always patted Miller on the shoulder, calling him "my own brother," now stood trembling, crumpling the printed newspaper and throwing it in Miller's face. He hissed through clenched teeth, "Explain this now. Don't make me drag up your old files in front of the whole department." Miller snapped back angrily. "Fake news. Tabloid lies. They doctored the clip. Do you believe me? but whispers were already buzzing down the hallway. Several officers looked at Miller with a mix of fear and hatred, the very thing they had long dared not speak aloud, but had now become secret gossip behind his back. At the end of the corridor, Harris sat alone on a bench, clutching his phone without daring to raise his head. He had read the article 3 times and still couldn't believe that the random words he'd typed in a few messages had been pieced together by a reporter into a bombshell. His fingers were soaked in sweat, his heart torn between relief and worry. Part of the truth had been exposed, but he also knew Miller's rage would flare more violently than anyone who dared defy him. Harris shuddered, imagining Miller throwing him into a car trunk at night and dumping him in the river, just as Miller had drunkenly threatened. Linda did not disappear. Late afternoon, Harris's phone buzzed. "Keep going, you are not alone. I am secretly protected by the FBI." The brief message was like a sedative, but also like adding fuel to the fire of straw Harris was standing in. He took a deep breath and typed back, "I'm afraid for my family." 2 minutes later, Linda replied, "I will ask the FBI to increase protection. Don't stop." Under the pale yellow lights at the police department hallway's end, Harris tightened his grip on the phone, heart pounding, knowing he had now stepped beyond the boundary of an ordinary police officer, and the way back was probably locked forever. In less than 48 hours from Linda's first article, the entire reputable facade of the Chicago Police Department was torn apart. Major news channels, which had cautiously reported the FBI handcuffing case, now dug deep, reopening Miller's old files that had been silently buried. Old reports revealed a slew of unlawful arrests, forced property searches, witness intimidation, all painting a picture that made anyone wonder how long the city had grown accustomed to a wolf in police clothing. Some former victims from poor neighborhoods filed class-action lawsuits, and several civil rights law firms immediately stepped in, promising to dig to the bone all the dirty traces left by Miller and his allies. Meanwhile, on the streets, people shared the article link like passing a flame, while inside the patrol car, Miller was going mad, like a cornered beast. He smashed his phone against the dashboard, cracking the screen, growling obscene curses at Linda, then slammed the gun butt into the console. He knew very well that the leak could only come from someone close to him, and Harris appeared in his mind like a black ink stain spreading on white paper. But Miller dared not act rashly, not out of fear of the law, but because he sensed public scrutiny was breathing down his neck. A few concrete walls away, the top brass of the police department were just as frantic. An emergency meeting took place behind closed doors, with those who had supported Miller arguing loudly, some ordering the media barred from accessing files, others worried the FBI had dug deeper than the reporters. Officers who had previously signed off on Miller's legitimizing documents were summoned to federal offices for information exchange. No cameras, no press, but everyone knew. The FBI had long infiltrated the system's core, waiting for the spark to trap the whole den. Linda kept close contact with Harris via messages, but this time it was not just one reporter. An entire group of FBI agents had been secretly planted around both of them. They left no signs, but hidden cameras and scout cars were parked scattered around Harris's neighborhood and Linda's usual cafes. In some dark room at the FBI headquarters, a few agents were hunched over a map, pinning every location, every angle, preparing to close the circle. Their goal was clear. The article was just bait, public opinion the shield. The real strike would come when all internal evidence was uncovered and Miller's backers had no time to destroy any traces. When the city lights flickered on, Harris drove alone across an old overpass leading to the outskirts. His hands still shook as he answered a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was deep and dry as groundstone. "Mr. Harris, this is a direct order. From now on, you receive instructions only from us. Do not report to anyone at the department, not even your captain. Do you understand?" Harris barely managed a grunt before bright headlights flared behind him, shining through the rearview mirror. A black car followed closely, flashing its lights like a hook, the glare striking Harris's eyes, making his heart pound. He knew that from now on the game was beyond his control, and there was no safe ground left for him to stand in the middle. After the second article spread like a knife cutting straight into the police department's reputation, Miller no longer doubted that only Harris was close enough to leak the details the press had just uncovered. That night, he sat alone in the kitchen, an unopened bottle of whiskey already half empty, his hand flipping an old phone back and forth. He scrolled through contacts, saved under symbols and numbers he had not needed to touch for a long time, but now they became the lifeline to pull his honor out of the mud. A brief message was sent. Need 2 people to clean up the job. Surveillance, report, anyone leaks disappears. 2 gangsters were hired that very night. One was skinny with a face full of scars like a hastily patched old net, the other short but tough like stone. They set up around Harris's house from early morning, taking turns on shifts, taking photos, filming secretly, noting the family's schedule, coming and going. At the same time, a dirty black pickup began to slowly cruise in front of the Linda's coffee shop where she often worked, occasionally parking across the street with headlights off. The person inside smoked silently, watching through the glass like a beast gnawing on bones, waiting for the scent of cooked meat. Harris was no fool. 3 days later, during a drizzly patrol, he saw the same old license plate tailing him from the gas station to the market door in his rearview mirror. At home, he found strange mud marks by the backyard fence and unfamiliar shoe prints on the wet ground. He did not say it outright, but sat at the dining table, picking a piece of egg for his son, then looked up at his wife and quietly said, as if about an everyday matter, "These days, don't come home too late. If possible, stay at your mother's a few nights, so I can be at ease." His wife looked at him, slightly stunned, but did not ask more. A few streets away, Linda received an anonymous email with a blank subject line. Attached were a series of photos showing her standing next to Harris in front of the coffee shop. The angle was low and shaky, like hastily taken from a car seat. Below was a line typed in rough Arial font, "Be careful before you speak." Linda felt a chill down her spine, but before she could shiver, she immediately pulled out her drawer, dialed a contact at the FBI, and requested increased surveillance. She did not say anything to Harris, fearing it would only push him into panic faster. Miller sat in the patrol car, one hand brushing the seatbelt, eyes staring blankly at the wet street. A secret call came through. The voice, rough through the signal, asked, "Are you going big?" Miller laughed loudly and answered briefly, "Don't worry, that kid won't have time to react. The next article? It will die quickly. I guarantee it." Silence followed for a few seconds before the other side hung up. Miller licked his lips, telling himself, FBI fence? Just dogs barking. At night, Harris sat in a car parked hidden under a long extinguished streetlight. He held his phone, opening a few unfinished messages he had not dared to send Linda. Cold wind slipped through the slightly open window, blowing on his neck. A slow, steady knocking sounded on the right window, like nails tapping on a coffin lid. Harris turned around, his heart tightening when he saw a tall, dark figure looming close, the breath fogging the misted glass like a beast sniffing a prey about to be paralyzed. Harris drove winding through several streets just to be sure no one was tailing him, then dared to pull over, sitting to catch his breath in front of his house. He looked at the clock, almost midnight. The porch light was dim, but the front door was ajar, noticeably off its lock. A cold sweat ran down his back. He stepped back, drew a small gun always kept under the seat, and carefully pushed the door open. A damp, old wood smell mixed with a chilling cold rushed out. The entire living room was ransacked, sofa cushions overturned, drawers empty. On the table, amidst the messy papers, a long-bladed dagger stood upright, pinning a white sheet with hastily scribbled red ink, his wife's name and his son's age. Harris froze like stone, his throat choking tight. He struggled to drag himself close and took the paper, his fingertips trembling violently. A sharp chest pain squeezed his heart from inside. In the dark, he heard blood roaring in his ears, heavy like a hammer blow. Harris collapsed beside the table, holding his head, face down on the cold wooden floor. He did not dare scream, only forced breaths to hold back tears. His whole body shook in waves. He dialed his wife's number, speaking with an oddly calm voice. "You stay more at your mother's place these days. I have continuous night shifts and come home late." On the other end, she asked why his voice sounded strange. He only smiled faintly, staring at the dagger still buried in the table, saying nothing. Shmota I no. Meanwhile, Linda left the newsroom later than usual after editing the new article. The deserted street was lit only by the yellowish high streetlights, casting shadows of her small car moving alone. She was lost in thought about an appointment with an FBI agent the next day when she suddenly braked hard. A black SUV suddenly sped out, pressed close to the curb, tires screeching sharply on the wet asphalt. Before she could scream, the driver's window was smashed violently, and a man wearing a black hoodie with a covered face shoved a rough, paper-wrapped bundle through the broken glass and disappeared like a ghost. Linda hurriedly opened it, spilling its contents on the passenger seat, photos of Harris taking his wife and child to the market, picking up their child at school gates, and several scrawled notes saying, "Shut up if you want to keep seeing him." Gritting her teeth, Linda hit the gas and sped away from that road, her heart burning with fear and rage. Miller sat cross-legged on a leather chair in his temporary rented apartment, holding a whiskey glass and listening to his subordinate reporting by phone. "Harris is very scared now. Linda dares not say anything more. Don't worry, boss." Miller narrowed his eyes and sniffed like a dog smelling blood. "Good. FBI fence? Just dogs barking. Wherever I move, once they know it's already too late." Harris locked all window latches, drew the curtains tightly, then sat slumped behind the sofa with a handgun resting on his lap, eyes wide open, staring at the dim yellow light. His heart pounded, breaths short, like a rat cornered with no escape. His phone vibrated softly, the screen lighting up with a message from an unknown sender. "Watch the windows tonight." He glanced at the side glass. A shadow just slipped through the garden, stepping on grass without a sound. Harris clenched the grip tightly, his index finger touching the trigger. Sweat ran down his spine in streaks. Any sound would be enough to pull the trigger. He knew this night would be as long as a whole year combined, and the darkness outside only waited for him to slip up to swallow his family, quietly and easily. Miller knew very well that public opinion outside had not yet cooled, despite the threats in the dark, the shadows lurking around the windows of Harris's and Linda's houses. The media did not stay silent, and civil rights lawyers kept digging up old kidnapping cases, continuously adding salt to his wound of honor. Every morning when Miller checked his phone, he saw his face, perfectly framed under the hashtag #StopMiller, mixed among clips of FBI agents handcuffing suspects from previous raids. On Saturday night, Miller sat in the patrol car, glancing at Harris, who sat stiffly in the driver's seat, then slammed the dashboard hard. His voice was hoarse from lack of sleep. "Enough playing around? Want to shut up the hounds outside? I'll give them something else to chew on. Tonight I will personally show this whole city who really makes the law." Harris sensed something was wrong but did not dare ask. He only heard Miller's mocking laugh, filled with old liquor and undying hatred. The patrol car crawled slowly around the edge of the city park, where yellow streetlights barely lit the thick bushes. Near the pond, a young black man in a gray hoodie, tall but thin, leaned against a lamppost, talking on the phone and gently kicking an empty can on the ground. Harris barely glanced and saw nothing suspicious, a single earphone, his clear laughter drifting through the night wind. But for Miller, this image was perfectly like a timely bait. "Loitering in the park at night? Drug use or dealing, no argument," Miller muttered, slowly pulling out his gun like a man savoring the moment. Harris wanted to stop him, but seeing the black barrel reflecting the streetlight, he swallowed the lump in his throat. Miller tapped the gun against Harris's shoulder. "Handcuff him. I'll stand here and watch your back." Harris stepped out, his limbs heavy as if weighed down by stones. He intended to cough lightly to warn the young man to run, but before he could speak, Miller strode forward, pressing the cold gun barrel directly against the back of the man's neck. The night wind whipped Harris's coat, sneaking into his back and making him shiver. "Get down on your knees, hands behind your head," Miller shouted. The young man turned around, his dark eyes flashing a moment of surprise before lowering. His voice was calm. "What did I do wrong?" Miller ignored him and slapped his cheek fiercely, the pale hand striking soft skin, leaving a bright red mark. Harris raised the handcuffs, his hands trembling so badly that the metal clanged against each other. When Miller leaned close, hissing through his teeth, "You're done for now, kid," the young man did not blink, only curling his lips slightly with a smile, his voice steady as if cutting through breath. "You just tied your own hands, you know that?" The words fell into Miller's ears, passed through Harris's, then shattered into the silence of the park night before the storm that was about to crash down on them. When Miller roughly pushed the young man into the back seat of the patrol car, Harris stood by the door, his hand still shaking from having just handcuffed an innocent person and unable to do anything. As he was about to close the door, the young man lowered his voice so only Harris could hear. "Tell the FBI enough. Don't let him stop the car in the dark." A whisper like thunder struck Harris's heart, making it skip a beat and pound violently. He glanced quickly into the young man's eyes. No fear, only a strange, clear light, the look of someone who already knew how the game would end. Miller slammed the car window, shouting, "Why are you just standing there? Get the camera ready. I'll show those trash reporters how I catch real criminals." Harris quietly opened his phone camera, aiming the lens at Miller's face while discreetly pressing an app to send an urgent location to the contact he had been told to notify. Miller stood before the car, grabbing the young man's collar and dragging him down to a vacant lot near the park's edge, pointing at the camera like a cheap actor. "Look, live evidence. Drug dealing right here in the park. Lucky I'm here." The young man remained silent, only glanced at Harris through the side mirror, nodding lightly. Harris turned his face away, avoiding Miller's gaze, clutching the phone tightly inside his jacket pocket. The location signal had just been sent, and a silent message popped up. "Received. Hold position." Inside Harris, two streams of blood seemed to run against each other, one part still afraid of Miller's gun, the other lighter, knowing the trap had sprung just as the FBI promised. Miller struggled to pull the young man to the center of the lot, pointing his gun at his face, growling threats like a wild beast scaring its prey before biting the neck. Harris stood a few meters away, scanning the darkness, just waiting for the familiar headlights to sweep across. And then it came. 1, 2, 3 beams of headlights turned on simultaneously, blinding the muddy lot. Tires screeched sharply, SUV doors flung open, and a loudspeaker voice boomed through the misty night. "Stop your whacking, federal agents. Miller, you are under arrest." Miller spun around, eyes wild, looking at Harris as if ready to devour him. You sold me out?" He'd just moved to raise his gun when 4 dark figures wearing bulletproof vests rushed in, pinned his shoulders, and twisted his arms behind his back. The sound of handcuffs clicking tightly around Miller's wrists echoed harshly and sharply, like the sealing of a rotten door. Harris stood still, gripping the hem of his uniform, staring at Miller's face pressed against the shining hood under the bright headlights. Miller's curses were now just the barking of a lost, panicked dog. No one feared him anymore, because everything had been exposed, right under the unshieldable light of true justice. The rainy night in Chicago drizzled lightly, the dampness seeping into Harris's coat making him shiver intermittently. He closed his coat tightly, clutching the thick briefcase firmly against his chest. Inside were pieces that could expose a long-rotted network of abuse of power within the police department he served. In front of him, an abandoned parking lot lay deserted, the pale yellow streetlights casting dim reflections on the slick puddles. This was the meeting spot he had chosen himself, near the suburban train station, away from city cameras, only a few old surveillance eyes scattered around. Harris knew clearly that tonight he was betting his life. He had planned to hand over the file to the reporter and immediately rushed to meet Collins, the FBI agent who promised to help him enter the witness protection program. Yet his heart beat faster by the minute, sweat soaking the back of his shirt despite the cold rain. He vaguely sensed something was wrong. About 30 meters from where he parked, a pitch-black SUV stood still, its headlights flicking on and off like a signal to someone lurking nearby. Harris gripped the briefcase strap tighter, pulling his phone from his pocket, just in time to see an anonymous message, "Leave now, it's a trap." His chest pounded, but before he could turn, the slam of a car door rang out like a death shot. Two broad-shouldered men, heads covered with hoodies, slowly stepped out from behind the SUV. Their boots crushed the wet asphalt with heavy, chilling thuds. Both kept their right hands close to their jackets, revealing the metallic shapes pressing under the fabric. One spat on the ground, growling, "Hand over the file, now, or you disappear from Chicago tonight in a plastic bag." Harris's breath caught in his throat. He backed against the cold concrete wall behind him, his mind racing for escape routes. But all he found was darkness and the growing sound of rain. Tonight, he had walked into a place with no way out, and in front of him were two cold barrels demanding to snatch the only chance he had to turn the tables. Crafted by Miller himself. Harris swallowed dryly, palms sweating as he gripped the briefcase strap, trying to steady his voice and stop trembling, eyes scanning desperately for a slim chance to breathe. Suddenly, his collar was yanked hard, forcing his body forward. The hot breath of a gun pressed against his ribs, mixed with the stench of sweat and gunpowder, mingling with the chill of the rainy night. The leader's face pressed close, smelling of alcohol and stale cigarettes. Harris nearly buckled, his hand behind him tightening on the briefcase, the last weapon to trade for his life. Inside, his mind shattered into hundreds of scenarios. Run, die, or stay silent and die slowly. His gaze dulled as only the sound of rain striking his face and the SUV's headlights flickering over the battered road remained. If he died tonight, all he had gathered over months would sink into the muddy rain, along with his body. Miller would be innocent, and the thugs would vanish without a trace. Fate had not yet turned away. From the dark corner behind the SUV, a figure in a long raincoat, hood pulled low to hide the face, silently emerged like mist dissolving into the night. A dry click cut through the rain's noise. A bullet flew sharply, piercing the leader's neck. The man stiffened, eyes wide, collapsing into the black puddle without a sound. Harris froze, his whole body trembling, dropping to the ground reflexively as the bullet hit the vehicle's metal with a ringing sound. The other thug roared and fired wildly. The raincoat figure did not return fire, but lunged like a ghost, steel-like arms wrapping around the thug's neck. A sharp twist, the crack of bones mingling with the rain hitting the tin roof. Everything fell silent for a few shallow breaths. The two attackers lay motionless under the rain, blood spreading in dark streaks across the scarred concrete. The stranger knelt before Harris, grasping his wrist, voice low and hoarse, as if accustomed to darkness. "Keep that file. Run now. Collins is waiting at the new meeting point. You will be safe as long as you don't look back." Harris struggled to swallow his fear, his voice breaking in his throat. Who are you?" The raincoat figure released his wrist, retreating slowly into the shadows, leaving behind a cold sentence. "A ghost in this game. Good luck, Harris." A headlight swept past. The distant wail of a police siren tore through the night like a knife. Harris tightened the briefcase against his chest and sprinted toward the dark alley, his heart pounding a single vital rhythm. Survive until dawn. Behind him, two bodies lay exposed, rain washing over the blood streaks, merging into the earth, silently flowing away like the secrets someone still tried to bury in the darkness of Chicago. In a windowless meeting room, the yellowed fluorescent light highlighted the curling cigarette smoke like a fog trapped within the cold gray walls. The smell of cold coffee mixed with sweat and damp tobacco clung to every wrinkle of the worn suits and stuck to the greasy hair of men who once saw this place as their fortress of power. Miller slumped on a rickety metal chair, his back hunched like an old beast worn out after a night of clawing at a nameless nightmare. His bloodshot eyes blinked repeatedly, red veins thick like a spider web wrapping the pupils that once looked at the world with disdainful half-lids. Three men in gray suits sat around a long, glass-covered table, each leaning back casually as if pretending to be polite in front of a clown who had just run out of tricks. Only a few months ago, they were the very names Miller brazenly mentioned as an iron shield against any legal trouble. But today, in their eyes, he was nothing more than a troublesome speck of dust. The man in the middle spoke in a low, hoarse voice, carrying a threatening undertone like a whetstone pressed to the throat. "Where is Harris? Who did you let him meet?" Miller swallowed dryly, his throat parched, his hands clenched so tightly that the joints ached sharply. His lips moved, avoiding the scrutinizing gaze before him. I had someone silence him, but the plan failed. He's still alive." As his confession ended, the man at the head of the table suddenly slammed a coffee cup down onto the glass, shards scattering with a sharp clatter, the thick coffee splattering on the pristine white sleeves like an ink stain of death. "Listen carefully, Miller. Either you bring him back, or you take care of your own rotten mouth first. Someone like Harris opens his mouth, and this whole nest ends up before the judge. Understand?" Outside the glass door, the drizzle tapped softly, small sounds enough to cut deeper into Miller's neck. In his mind, the words "eliminate" repeated, twisting like a nail hammered tightly into a coffin. But somewhere beneath the sweat-damp skin a cold pool spread, engulfing his lungs, beating a warning rhythm. He was just a pawn whose moves had run out. Not far away, down a thick concrete corridor, Collins stood in a narrow briefing room. His voice was not loud, but firm enough that each word dropped onto the tiled floor like iron shackles. "All data provided by Harris has been verified. Arrest footage, message logs, anonymous death threats. The nationwide arrest warrant was approved by the federal court at 4 a.m. Not a single one will escape." Dry acknowledgments replied sharply. Agents' boots tapped rhythmically on the floor. Holstered guns checked, jacket collars zipped up tight, the FBI badge gleaming under neon lights like a suffocating proclamation for a long night of restraint nearing its end. Outside, mist and drizzle merged into a thick gray veil. The city streets still slumbered, streetlights clung to yellow moss. Under those lights, black SUVs moved silently, headlights off, parked scattered before mansions, front companies, and back alley bars. The polite knocks gave way to screeching kicks on hinges, radios clicking with encrypted codes, shouted commands echoing through the rain. "FBI, freeze! Hands behind your head!" A prominent man, face still smeared with shaving cream, was dragged roughly from his bedroom, dropping his silk floral robe. His wife and children screamed and scrambled into a corner while he stood stiff as a log, eyes wide as cold steel handcuffs snapped on his greasy wrists. Some cops with conscience quietly opened iron gates, letting agents slip through, silencing stunned guards who never expected the top dogs to fall in just one night. Miller received news of his comrade's arrests just as he roared out of the underground parking lot. The steering wheel slipped from his hands, tires mounted the sidewalk, lightly hitting a lamppost that sparked. His spine chilled with dread. "Fucking FBI dogs," he hissed through clenched teeth, flooring the gas like a trapped beast. Back at his old apartment, he yanked open the safe, grabbed stacks of cash, stuffed fake papers hastily, and dragged a creaking suitcase across the cold, damp stone floor. In his mind, dozens of self-destructive scenarios collided with images of airport customs and truck tires crushing old license plates. But in his chest, a lingering illusion whispered, "You still have a way." A suitcase clattered through the doorway as dawn broke, drizzle stinging his face like pinpricks. A siren howled down the alley, headlights flashing on Miller's dark circles. A figure in black ballistic armor blocked his path, the FBI badge glittering, heavier than the concrete wall Miller had once leaned on, baring his teeth in a bitter smile. And in that moment, he understood. The noose was no longer around the pawn Harris, but tightening around his own neck. In the safe house, Harris was gaunt, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow as if a lifetime of sleep would never make up for the nights shadowing Miller. The paper bowl of noodles in front of him cooled, steam swirling aimlessly, but his insides coiled into a hard knot. The old scratch on his wrist was still wet from last night's rain. Collins stood by the door, hands in his coat pockets, voice hoarse but resolute. "You have made your choice, Harris. Harris. You could have run that night, but you came back. From now on, you are the only key locking down this rat's nest." Harris said nothing, eyes fixed on the swollen file like a nightmare pillow. The blue pen placed before him, sweat dripping from his forehead onto the paper's edge. His first signature trembled, like a child's drawing, but as he continued, the strokes grew steel wrong, like a blade slicing through rotten flesh, long ready to bleed. Collins gently pushed the file toward the lone reporter allowed inside. No cameras, only a thick notebook and eyes sharper than a sword. Harris looked up, met that gaze, took a deep breath, flipping through pages of crimes. The night Miller tore up a single mother's eviction report. The day Harris swallowed his conscience to cooperate, and the night he hid fake files under the meeting table. Each detail pulled like a hook, stripping away the last fear lodged in his spine. Outside Miller's apartment gate, FBI vehicles blocked the way. Neighbors peeked from windows, recording the neighborhood hero being twisted, face pushed into muddy grass. The headlights shone through the SUV's dark windows, where Harris sat upright, eyes locking with Miller's. A look no longer trembling or avoiding, but as steady as an iron door slamming shut on a final escape dream. The click of a lock echoed. Collins stood beside him, signaling the ready camera on the interrogation table. Harris placed his hands on the cold surface, nails gripping lightly, then raised his head to stare into the blinking red dot. His voice was hoarse but clear as a hammer, sealing a rat's nest. "My name is Harris. I was once a Chicago cop, and today I will tell the whole truth." Behind the one-way glass, Collins nodded silently, eyes like steel gates, guarding against powerful fingers that had crawled in the shadows for 10 years. As soon as the third article appeared, accompanied by recordings of Miller's harsh voice threatening Harris and the reporter, everything crashed down on him faster than any previous arrest. The police department was shaken. Those who had once patted him on the shoulder or raised glasses with him quietly withdrew, changed their phone numbers, and locked their private offices. Internal Affairs inspectors appeared with a file as thick as a brick, calling Miller's name coldly in the hallway, and no one dared to look at him for more than 3 seconds. Miller understood that the vultures had begun tearing each other apart, and this time no one would shield him like in the past years. On a drizzly night, Miller sat in a cheap bar at the end of the street, flipping over a crumpled note with the phone number of a broker. He had already called, his voice trembling even though he cursed to maintain authority with the man on the other side. Everything was set. Fake documents, a Canadian passport, a route out of the state that customs would have difficulty tracking. He just needed to disappear for a few weeks until the public outcry cooled down. He believed some old hand would reach out to pull him out of the mud like before. He secretly sold the old patrol car and threw his uniform into a public trash bin, cash stuffed in the pockets of his jacket, and a gun hidden in the trunk of the rental car in case a coward dared to block his way. The broker arranged to deliver the papers by the old riverbank, where only a few dim yellow streetlights flickered. In his pants pocket, Miller always kept a cheap pack of cigarettes, the filter smelling strongly to cover the sweat seeping from his back. Meanwhile, Harris maintained his role as a regular cop, still going in and out of the station and lowering his head whenever he accidentally crossed paths with Miller in the hallway. But as soon as Miller turned his back, Harris immediately took notes on every drunken word Miller said and secretly sent them straight to Linda. The FBI agent had long planted a bug in Miller's car, recording every curse, escape plan, and threat against Harris, all neatly stored on a hard drive waiting to explode. Harris told himself, "He still believes I'm scared. Good. Let him think that." The FBI quietly followed. Miller had no idea there was a tiny chip hidden under the battery cover of his watch, sending coordinates back to the federal office every second. They deliberately let him feel everything was going smoothly, so he would step harder on the gas and speed right into the trap they had prepared. On the final night before everything vanished, Miller pulled his coat tight, started the rental car, carrying a bag with the papers and the gun hidden deep under the floor. The radio blasted an old rock channel, pounding on his eardrums like hypnosis. He turned off the main road, slipping into a narrow path leading to the western outskirts of Chicago, where where the streetlights grew increasingly sparse, leaving only the sound of tires scraping the cold, damp road. Less than 10 minutes later, at the darkest curve, a dilapidated truck blocked the road, its headlights blazing, cutting off escape like a solid steel wall. Miller stepped on the gas, intending to swerve around, muttering curses, but the engine warning lights flashed bright red, the steering wheel froze stiff, the car trembled violently before abruptly dying, leaving him sitting rigid in the pitch-black cabin with a heavy breath weighing down his chest. The trap had closed in, and Miller had only one way left to fall into, the trap he never thought would be set for him. The car died in the night. The radio cut out suddenly, leaving thick silence, broken only by Miller's pounding heart, each beat like a funeral drum announcing a dishonorable end. He reached into his jacket pocket, fingertips brushing the safety catch of the small hidden gun. A faint whistle through the night wind blew through the slightly open car window, carrying the smell of burnt gasoline, damp mud, and a faint human scent lurking near the blocking truck. Miller pushed the door open, stepping on gravel that crackled like crushed eggshells. His hand stayed hidden in his pocket, gripping the gun tightly, as his eyes scanned for an escape route. Then a shadow emerged from behind the truck. Steady strides, tall and lean but broad-shouldered, the face gradually revealed under the pale yellow headlights. The face Miller never forgot. The FBI agent he once handcuffed in the park, forced to kneel on the grass before a crowd live streaming on their phones. The air tightened between the two men. Miller tried to smirk, clutching the gun's safety, but before he could draw it, a cold click echoed as metal pressed against his forehead. The agent stepped closer, his voice low and sharp, cutting each word. "You think you can run, Miller? You think our cameras just record your heroic acts?" Sweat slid from Miller's temple, dripping onto his collar, soaking into his shirt, smelling of old liquor and smoke. He stammered, they pushed me into this. I was only following orders." But the agent gave no chance for pity stories. A swift jerk, the gun clattered across the pavement. The agent twisted Miller's arm, forcing his palm down on the car hood, a humiliating position mirroring when Miller had once forced others' heads down while still wearing his powerful police uniform. The sound of handcuffs snapping shut, metal clashing against metal, dry and final, severed the last thread of hope for escape. Further away, in the dark edge of the woods, Harris sat in the FBI car, the window cracked open slightly, white smoke mingling with the cold night air. He watched everything, from the moment Miller reached into his pocket until he was subdued, handcuffed like a wild animal caught in a trap. Harris still trembled inside, but for the first time he felt some weight lift off his back. The last monster had been dragged into the light. The silent sighs of the people were answered with the sharp clang of handcuffs striking the flesh of the corrupt ruler. The agent leaned close to Miller's ear, voice low and steady like a knife driving deep into the spine. "We're not just arresting you, Miller. You will expose that whole nest, or you will rot away in a cell. No one will mourn you." Behind them, FBI patrol car lights flashed on in unison, white beams illuminating Miller's now waxy pale face, his lips mouthing meaningless words no one cared to hear anymore. The filthy spiral he had spun for years had now pulled him down to the bottom, with no way out. The temporary cell did not smell of mildew, but the cold clung tightly to Miller's skin, combined with the yellow light flickering erratically from the ceiling, making his nerves tense like rusty steel wire. One hand was handcuffed tightly to a metal bar, crossing a bolted metal chair fixed to the floor, his eyes staring blankly at several blotchy water stains. He clearly heard sparse footsteps in the hallway, the rustle of papers somewhere, and his own breath, reeking of old, fermented alcohol, in his throat. Inside Miller's head was now only a string of curses, muttered like an old dog barking at the moon, cursing Harris, the traitor bastard, cursing Linda, the loud-mouthed woman, and cursing the fat bosses who once patted his shoulder and slipped envelopes into his coat pocket but now turned their backs as if he never existed. He knew drunkenness could no longer save him. Just as the gun had slipped from his hand, the pack had abandoned him. Only his arrogant skeleton, trapped with his own darkness, remained. The iron door creaked sharply, cutting through the flow of curses that ran like dirty water in Miller's mind. The FBI agent entered, a tall, thin man with broad shoulders, sun-darkened face, and black eyes hiding a cold gleam. He carried a thick file, worn cover but intact spine, proving this was no pile of papers just stacked for show. He pulled a metal chair opposite Miller, called no backup, needed no extra handcuffs, just one look enough to force silence. The agent placed the file on the metal table but did not open it immediately, instead tapping his index finger lightly on the cover. The steady tapping sounded like a ticking clock counting down. "You've been acting well all these years, Miller. I'm curious, when did you start playing this role?" Miller sneered, his teeth clicking together, his voice trying to sound casual but cracked like rotten wood. "I just followed the law. What do you useless people know? This street doesn't need heroes in suits. It needs guns and handcuffs." The agent did not smile. His gaze never wavered for a second. He leaned forward, lowering his voice, steady like a hammer striking the shell Miller had carried for years. "You did it for justice? Or for the night your father was stomped face down by his own teammates, his mouth torn open in front of your mother, and you didn't dare say a word? 10 years old, Miller. 10 years old, and you learned to spit on everything weak. Tell me." Miller glared, pupils shrinking like a nightmare he could not wake from. His lips twitched, breath smelling of sweat and the stale smoke deep in his lungs. A memory flickered through his mind. The night his father, a ragged cop, was dragged by a drunk colleague into the armory, taught a lesson with fists and rifle butts, then left bleeding under the silent son's feet. He clenched his teeth, growled, yanked his handcuffed arm so the metal chair scraped harshly across the floor, and spat out his usual defiant phrase. "Shut up, you know nothing about me." His free hand slammed on the table, veins on his neck bulging like snapping cords. Outside the one-way glass, other agents' eyes stayed glued, ready in case the chair bolts gave way, while the man across continued tapping the file cover like a clock signaling Miller's long night had just begun. The clanging of iron in the cell quieted to just Miller's heavy breathing, rasping like the last breath of a trapped wild animal. The agent opposite remained calm, black eyes glinting like cold steel. He did not relent, leaning close enough to whisper words dripping like acid through Miller's skin. "I know enough to understand your hatred for everything you cannot control. When you see black skin, brown skin, anyone who doesn't bow, you see them as the faces of those who stomped your father's face that night." Miller burst into a harsh coughing laugh mixed with phlegm, then bowed his head onto the icy metal table, voice mingled with breath and foul air. "Who am I? I am the one who took my father's place over those filthy bastards. Justice? Damn it, I am the law. Every fancy-dressed punk who insults cops, I choke with handcuffs." His face twisted, wet with sweat and tears mixed together without him even realizing. The agent was silent for several seconds before slowly turning a page in the file, his voice slicing allusions like a knife. "And your law is using guns and handcuffs to silence the innocent? To coerce young cops like Harris into complicity? To silence reporters? Finish it, Miller. Who did you disappear evidence with? Who in the department stuffed money to silence the media?" Miller slammed the table, about to shout, but at the moment his thick armor cracked. Curses turned into gasping breaths. Amidst the nonsense, he blurted out several names: squad officers, a department head, even a lawyer pretending to be the police spokesman to whitewash the press. Each name fell like blood from a torn wound. They could not save Miller, but only expose the rats behind him. The agent said nothing more, merely nodded slightly, eyes glancing at the corner of the table, where the recorder still hummed softly, like a death lullaby. The cell atmosphere grew heavy as if lead was poured inside. Then the agent leaned close, lowering his voice so only the two could hear. "You have no more choices, Miller. Want to live? Confess everything, right now, or tomorrow morning the press will hear this, and your friends in prison will be waiting with sharpened toothbrushes. You understand, don't you?" For the first time since wearing the uniform, Miller sat still like rotting wood. He looked down at the handcuffs gripping his sinewy shadowy wrist, then at the agent like a judge passing sentence. His broad shoulders trembled, breaths rasping like a creature stripped of claws. The chair where he sat was once where he dragged criminals to intimidate. Now he himself was the fragile one. The agent stood, about to close the file. The flickering ceiling light cast Miller's shadow on the wall like a beast about to be caged for life. He growled softly, sharp as a sword sliding through the crack of the door. The light of justice may be slow, but it comes. You have 12 hours to decide, witness or permanent prisoner. The iron door slammed shut. Inside, only the rattling of handcuffs and Miller's incoherent murmurs remained, while the cold corner of the cell watched him swallow hard, waiting for the night to swallow him whole. On the day the trial opened, the city's atmosphere seemed drawn to a single point, the old courthouse nestled beside the Central Park. The early morning mist had barely lifted, already swallowed by the heat of people, the hum of cameras, and relentless questions. The public seats were packed tightly with no gaps. Along the corridor, reporters jostled each other. Microphones stretched forward like steel spears aimed at the courtroom door. Online, the hashtag Justice for All flooded every news feed, even overshadowing the latest football match results. Beneath the faded yellow lights, a group of black people sat silently amid the restless crowd. Their simple shirts bore a cold white phrase, "Justice for All." They did not chant slogans or raise signs, only sat quietly, eyes fixed on the judge's bench, as if waiting for the blade of justice to be sharpened to its edge today. Behind the heavy oak door, Harris stood in the witness waiting room. His white shirt, neatly ironed, was now wrinkled at the cuffs from his own hands. His eyes were bloodshot from sleepless nights, but no longer held the panic they once did. In his hand was a briefcase, containing not only documents, but also the silent nights when he held his breath listening to Miller's threats through the cracks of the patrol car seat. The trial manager's voice echoed, "Witness Harris, please prepare." Harris took a deep breath, forced his trembling shoulders down, and pushed the door open. Each step from the corridor to the witness stand felt like passing through the nightmares he had faced. Miller, yelling, growling on the phone, the worried faces of his wife and children lurking behind the door. But today he walked straight ahead without looking back. On the opposite side of the room, Miller sat with his head bowed, hands cuffed loosely on the wooden table. His gray-striped prison uniform made him look small and lost among the sea of cameras and watching eyes. Occasionally he glanced toward the public, hoping for a pitying look, but only met icy hard stares. Anyone who once believed in his innocence had now turned away. The projector clicked on. Behind the jury seats, the white wall turned into a large screen. The image blurred, then sharpened. Miller grabbing the shoulder of a black man in a suit, yelling like a wild beast, pushing him down onto the grass in the park as the crowd looked on in shock. The clinking of metal, handcuffs snapping tightly onto the man's wrists as he stood straight, eyes calm and staring directly into the live-streaming phone camera. The courtroom murmured like waves crashing on the shore. A mother covered her child's mouth, but not before the black boy's eyes widened, staring at the image on the wall. He grabbed his father's hand, tears beginning to form. Someone in the back row hissed through clenched teeth, "Enough already, this beast of a cop." At the witness stand, Harris stood upright. He no longer looked at Miller, but at the jury, 12 people holding the rope that bound the rest of Miller's life. His voice was not loud, but cut sharply through the thick air. "I stand here not to defend my cowardly fear. I stand here to tell the truth about what happened that afternoon in the park, which should have been the safest place for anyone, regardless of skin color." Harris recounted everything from Miller's shadow falling over the black agent, to the night he hid a recorder under the seat, hearing Miller whisper death threats to bury his family alive if he spoke a word. Each sentence he spoke was like a needle piercing the already tense atmosphere, pushing it to the brink of explosion. Then he paused, pulling from his pocket an old recorder. His trembling hand lightly tapped the plastic case, like knocking on the courtroom door. "This is Miller's voice, nothing added or taken away. It's all here." The courtroom held its breath. Hands gripped chair arms tightly. Miller's eyes widened. He knew the final door had closed. Outside the corridor, the justice hashtag was still exploding. Harris folded his hands and handed the recorder to the prosecutor as if offering a sword forged by the nights he and his family had lived in fearful darkness. The prosecutor, a salt-and-pepper-held man, received it with both hands, looked across the courtroom, then declared in a low voice, "Original evidence, unedited. You will hear the accused's own words." A slight nod signaled the technician. Seconds later, crackling sounds and growling filled the speakers. Miller, inside the patrol car that night, sneered with a voice both threatening and contemptuous, as if the legal system was just a watchdog he waved off. He mentioned bribes, colleagues turning a blind eye, superiors accepting envelopes then ordering cases to be buried, names dropped one by one, falling into the suffocating room like stains exposed by the spotlight. The courtroom fell silent. No one breathed evenly. In a corner, a young reporter with a baby face, hands shaking, still wrote furiously. In the public seats, an elderly woman clasped her hands before her chest, eyes wet but holding back tears. Outside the corridor, a group of students stared at their phone screen, live streaming to thousands, commenting, "Parasites disguised as cops, make them pay. Justice lives here, watch closely." On the defendant's stand, Miller trembled like a trapped animal. He slapped his hands on the wooden table, hitting so hard a corner cracked open. His screams tore through the courtroom. "Lies! You don't understand. I am a police officer. I protect you, you fools." He lunged up, cuff wrists clanging like chains. Two judicial police officers immediately restrained him, pushing him down into the chair, pressing his head onto the table like hammer blows. He struggled, neck veins bulging, spittle flying from his mouth, but every scream was drowned out by the repeated pounding of the wooden gavel. The judge's hoarse, steel-hard voice rang out, "Order! This court will not shed a single drop of blood due to the madness of a defendant." A silence lasted a few heartbeats. The whole room seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Then the prosecutor, the gray-hailed man, stood slowly. He turned and stepped toward Miller, eyes like a sharpened wooden mallet ready to shatter the false masks Miller and his gang had worn for years. He stopped, raised a finger pointing directly at the man shackled under the cold white light. "This man once wore the police badge, once trusted to keep peace, but today, before you, he is not a cop. He is a stain this system has nurtured, covered up, and smeared across the honor of those truly upright." His voice lowered, but each word fell onto the courtroom floor like iron stakes driven into the foundation of justice. "With what you have heard and seen, we demand the highest sentence for Miller. We officially open the prosecution files against all who colluded, took bribes, and twisted the law to protect a monster. Justice will not stop here. End of statement." The courtroom remained as still as if holding its breath. Then a rustle came from the public seats, a small clap, then another, and soon the entire room erupted in thunderous applause, sweeping away choking sobs, washing away the despair reflected in Miller's faltering eyes. In a corner of the corridor, a phone screen wavered, with the heartbeat of thousands waiting for the verdict to fall. The hammer of justice this time was not raised to threaten, but came down mercilessly. Harris stood there, still at the witness stand where just minutes before his voice had trembled, caught between fear and courage. But now, after the prosecutor's final words struck like a hammer splitting rotten wood, he felt a lightness in his heart. The looming figure of Miller, once a nightmare standing behind his neck every night, had vanished. Before him now was a worn body, loose handcuffs, hollow eyes, breathing heavily like a trapped beast running out of air. Harris looked Miller straight in the eyes without flinching, as he had during years of being threatened with a gun to his temple. One heartbeat long enough for the man to realize now the thin black man, shorter by a full head, was the one holding the knife, deciding the rest of his fate. Harris's voice rose, barely above a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through the heavy air. He did not shout or accuse further, but let everything fall out as it had festered in his chest for years. He confessed his fear of Miller, fear that stole his sleep, fear that whenever he looked at his sleeping child, he imagined dirty hands touching its neck. He admitted all the trembling hands, the bowed head, the resignation. Then he paused, nodded softly as if speaking more to himself than to the courtroom. But now I only feel pity for him. I am no longer afraid. He has nothing left to scare me. His breath dissolved into the murmuring speakers, falling on the listeners like raindrops pooling on a tin roof after a long rainy season, finally finding a crack to seep through. He bowed to the judge and turned to walk down. Each step along the aisle between the public seats closed the path he had crawled for years. The eyes that once looked at him with suspicion, whispered behind his back, calling him a coward, now were silent, replaced by looks of respect, the only thing that could soothe the invisible scars on a man once trampled to the bone. On the high bench, the old judge nervously adjusted his glasses, fingers tapping lightly on the worn wooden gavel. He looked at Harris, then Miller, then swept across the crowded room as if gathering the breath and faith of every mouth and eye to compensate for the verdicts long lost in files buried deep in this courthouse's safe. His voice was hoarse but clear, firm as the brick wall shielding from lightning that had stood for 100 years. The court will recess and announce the verdict this afternoon. Trust that justice does not sleep. Today it has awakened through the voices of those who dared to stand. Then, like a seed breaking its shell after the rain, applause erupted. No one knew from which corner. One, then two, then three. Soon the entire courtroom swelled like a forest stirred by wind, hands clapping not only to congratulate Harris or to scorn Miller, but to remind each other that justice may be silent, may be silenced, but it never dies. Amid the wave of applause, Miller's face drifted like a rotten log with no place to cling. He no longer screamed nor sought pity, only a stripped, solitary man, robbed of power and all the invisible shields that had borne the blows for him over decades. Harris stopped at the courtroom door and turned one last time. He did not look at Miller, but at the whole room, at the sprinkled heads, the clenched hands, the tears no longer hidden for fear of appearing weak. He knew today was not the end. The names Miller had revealed would bring many more trials, but at least from here the dawn had begun at this witness stand, from the wooden gavel just struck and from the voices demanding justice. A sound once drowned out too long by the noise of power. The final hammer fell decisively. The oak door opened, and light flooded in, bringing hope not only for Harris but for a city that once believed justice was nothing but a distant dream. On the morning of the final trial session, the Chicago District Courthouse was as crowded as a festival opening. Along the sidewalk, television vans were packed tightly, their antennas spinning continuously. Reporters squeezed through security barriers like schools of predatory fish circling a puddle of hot news. Inside the courtroom, murmurs of voices could not overpower the strange silence clinging to the wooden benches. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the defendant's seat, where Miller was escorted by two officers, hands tightly cuffed, wearing a gray prison uniform that now wrapped a back no longer as taut as the powerful vest he once wore. Miller's face was expressionless, like plaster left out in the rain too long, with gray wrinkles and sunken black eyes. The judge's gavel struck 3 harsh beats. His voice read the sentence slowly, each word hard like a sledgehammer hitting the crown of the head. Charges: unlawful detention, abuse of power in the line of duty, violence against citizens, obstruction of federal investigation. Sentence: imprisonment, permanent revocation of police badge, asset freeze, recovery of city budget subsidies. Each phrase sounded like a monster clawing out of the police department's guts, deeply rooted for years. Miller bowed his head, his shoulders twitching slightly, but he did not utter a word. No one feared or respected the man who once made parts of Chicago bow their heads. The courtroom fell silent before slowly bursting into chatter. Harris sat among the crowd, not in uniform, only a simple gray shirt, hands clasped tightly, shoulders straight for the first time like a proper officer. A few rows away, an elderly black woman, who once held a photo of her wrongly accused grandchild and had trembled calling Harris Miller's shadow, now bowed to shake his hand. Her dry, wrinkled hand gripped firmly, a silent word of forgiveness. An FBI agent leaned by the exit door, his eyes slowly scanning the courtroom packed with reporters. His gaze stopped on groups of civil rights activists, quietly chanting slogans. Police transparency. Return justice. Their voices were not loud, but clear enough to signal that the cleansing would not stop at Miller. News flooded online like a waterfall. Historic trial. The power cover-up chain exposed. Black communities across Chicago held candlelight vigils, placing flowers beneath plaques bearing the names of forgotten victims. The court officially announced the formation of an independent oversight committee. Every officer would be monitored like an ordinary citizen, a phrase once ridiculed, now engraved on the new headquarters gates. When Miller was led down the long hallway by two guards, cold lights illuminated his pale cheekbones, his eyes empty like torn paper, no trace of the beast who once growled threateningly across the district. Harris stepped out onto the courthouse steps, lifted his face to the morning breeze, the early September chill slipping through his collar, sweeping away the suffocating dust lodged in his lungs for years. The FBI man standing on the steps watched Harris a moment longer than usual. In his eyes was not judgment, but the look of a man planting a pure seed into old soil, believing it would sprout despite the surrounding filth. The black SUV slowly passed through golden-lit intersections. Streetlights began flickering like the eyes of the sleepless. In the back seat, the FBI agent leaned slightly, eyes open but not really seeing the rows of houses flashing by outside. In his mind, the park scene from that noon played in slow motion, the smell of damp grass, the shouts around, the cold steel tightening on wrists, dirt smeared on cheeks, and Miller's snarling face looming above. That feeling had not faded even after the trial closed. One fallen man could not save a system corroded to its core. He knew that better than anyone. His fingers tapped lightly on his thigh, a habit whenever his mind felt like a block of lead. Miller was neither the first nor the last. Years lost amid internal files buried, recordings locked away awaiting higher-level instructions. He was too familiar with it all. The root lay in fear, in prejudice ingrained in blood, and in a power that no one bothered to leash with oversight. He knew there were still other Millers out there, smirking at new badge ceremonies. He recalled Harris stepping off the courthouse steps this morning, a young soldier who once bowed before Miller, once silenced by fear, now standing straight, eyes open to the truth. A new internal oversight force would be born. Harris and a few young colleagues would be retrained, taught to wield weapons without becoming tools of blind anger or bias. And he, the unnamed FBI man, would continue standing behind, nurturing those seeds of justice without letting their roots suck up the mud Miller left behind. A phone rang, cutting through his thoughts. The screen flashed a superior's name. A sharp order came. Prepare a full report. Next week we launch a new purge. Chicago Police Department is just the start. He nodded without a word. Though Miller had fallen, many faces remained hidden, but he believed the light of justice had been lit and would be hard to snuff out. The car stopped at the curb, the door opened automatically, and the night wind swept into the cabin carrying the sound of sirens echoing down the avenue. He murmured a phrase, low and firm as a nail driven in. Injustice will always find shelter, but the light of justice will never go out. His steps merged into the flow of Chicago's streets. No badge pinned on his chest, no cameras chasing, no applause or flashing lights. Only a man among the city's crowd, continuing to guard fairness no matter how thick the darkness outside. On what seemed like an ordinary afternoon in Chicago, a white police officer believed he had enough power to trample on a man's honor simply because of his skin color and his sharply pressed suit. He thought a pair of handcuffs, some shouting, and a contemptuous glance would make the man bow his head and obey, like so many others he had disciplined. What he did not expect was that the victim that day was actually the dagger hidden in Justice's sleeve, waiting for the right moment to slash open the filthy nest of corruption Chicago had concealed for years. A handcuffing in the park triggered a large-scale hunt. The handcuffed man was an FBI agent, while the one cuffing him turned out to be a rotten link in a chain of corruption rooted in the most powerful hands. The outcome was clear. The one who once mocked others into submission now hung his head, and the one once despised stood tall, exposing the entire nest of worms to the light. Behind the painful ending for one Miller lies a lesson everyone should remember when stepping outside. Never judge others by their skin color, clothing, or posture. Do not think a uniform or seat of power grants you the right to insult or label a person. Sometimes the one you disdain is the very door through which justice steps forward. And when justice acts, it does not stop at one Miller. It will drag out every last person who thought they were safe behind the door of secret file. In this society, who has never been labeled a student called stupid just because they do not memorize, like the front row kid, an employee criticized as useless simply for not flattering the boss, a person of color glanced at sideways for daring to wear a suit and sit on a park bench at noon. Most frightening of all is when we ourselves, sometimes unknowingly, become Miller, uttering a contemptuous word, casting a look that drags others down, then deluding ourselves. We are the wise ones who know the rules. But what then? The truth still exists, silently and persistently like groundwater beneath the cement of power. It does not shout or boast. It only waits for the right moment to break the lies, expose those who think themselves untouchable in public, and force them to bow before witnesses and cameras. This story is not just a mistaken arrest, a disgraced cop, or an agent unleashing anger. It is a reminder. Never underestimate anyone's true value. Talent, dignity, justice, these are things that cannot be twisted by threats or bent by envelopes and red stamps. The one who plays the wolf may turn out to be just a snake, and snakes fear the light the most. Look back at yourself. Have you ever been misjudged simply because someone did not understand you? Have you silently endured being belittled, then quietly proven you were stronger than they thought? If so, do not be ashamed. Let those scars become armor. Turn the scorn of the world into motivation, so that one day, when someone tries to handcuff you with prejudice, you can calmly watch them fall before the evidence you hold. Do not fear if you have ever been humiliated for not having enough money, elegance, or influence. What matters most is having the courage to live truthfully. Truth takes time, but it always wins. It may simmer like a small flame, but when it flares up, it burns down the roots of power once thought unshakable. Never forget, the very victim handcuffed that day taught Chicago a lesson no textbook teaches. Justice does not need to shout. It only needs patience and incorruptibility. Are you willing to be part of that justice? Have you ever been misjudged because someone did not understand you? Have you been underestimated but quietly proved you are better than they thought? If you are nodding, share this story. Do not keep it to yourself. Someone out there is also bowing their head because they were despised. Show them they are not alone. And if you believe in the truth, believe justice still exists, even in the darkness, subscribe to this channel, so together we can continue telling stories about people, faith, and how truth, no matter how slow, always wins. Share it, stand tall, and if one day someone tries to handcuff you with prejudice, smile, because you know those cuffs cannot hold a heart and mind forged by these very wounds. Justice never sleeps, and the nest of snakes is only waiting for the day they are dragged into the light. Believe and stand on the right side. Are you ready?